Hey there, tonight we're diving into what New Year's was like in Victorian England, where the truth is that revelry was often a genteel affair, more about solemn toasts and less about wild parties. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. If you happen to time travel to a New Year's Eve party in Victorian England, prepare to trade your modern-day party hats for top hats and bustles. The Victorian era, with all its grandeur and grit, was a time when celebrating the new year meant navigating a world caught between old traditions and new industrial realities. It's a bit like watching a steampunk drama unfold, only with fewer gargles and more mutton chops. The Victorians knew how to usher in the new year with style, or at least their version of it. Let's talk about Queen Victoria herself. She was the original influencer, long before Instagram. Her reign from 1837 to 1901 was the backdrop for some serious cultural shifts in how the British did just about everything, including celebrating the dawn of another year. Under her reign, the monarchy became a symbol of domesticity and family values, a sort of royal version of keeping up with the Windsors. Her Christmas traditions, like the Christmas tree, were already getting traction, and naturally, her take on New Year's wasn't far behind. So how did the lady on the throne set the tone for New Year's? Well, it's not like she was out there organizing fireworks, though wouldn't that be a sight? Her influence trickled down through society. The Victorians were known for their love of ceremony and spectacle, and New Year's Eve was no different. The holiday was a time to reflect on the past year, possibly over a glass of sherry, and anticipate the new one with hope, or at least a stiff upper lip. Now, let's talk industrialization and the rise of the middle class. These were the real game changers, the secret ingredients in this historical cocktail. With the Industrial Revolution chugging along like a steam engine on a mission, the British economy was booming. Factories were sprouting up like mushrooms after rain, and with them, a burgeoning middle class that had both the means and the desire to celebrate in style. In 1841, the census reported that over half of the population lived in towns and cities, a sharp contrast to the rural life that defined earlier decades. This urbanization brought with it a shift in social dynamics and, importantly, in how people celebrated. The newly affluent middle class wanted to flex their economic muscles, and what better way than to throw a party? They adopted and adapted high society traditions, adding their own flair. Think lavish dinners, elaborate balls, and enough champagne to float a battleship. But don't be fooled by the frills and fancy footwork. This was also a time when social pressures were at an all-time high. Keeping up appearances was practically a competitive sport, and heaven forbid one should be caught wearing last year's barnet. The Victorians had a knack for making even their leisure activities feel like a moral obligation. Speaking of questionable fashion choices, let's pause to appreciate the sartorial splendor of the era, a time when men sported waistcoats and women wore dresses that could double as parachutes. The crinolines were so wide that doorways had to be navigated sideways, and those top hats weren't just for show, they were practically status symbols. The whole ensemble was a visual reminder of the social hierarchy, because why should New Year's be any different? But beneath the layers of silk and taffeta lay the real engine of these celebrations, the desire for social mobility and recognition in a rapidly changing world. Industrialization didn't just alter the landscape, it redefined social aspirations. People were eager to mingle, network, and maybe even climb the social ladder a rung or two, all while pretending they weren't trying too hard. As midnight approached, there was one tradition that united all classes, the singing of Auld Lang Syne. This wasn't some Victorian Spotify hit, but a classic even back then. Based on a poem by Robert Burns, the song was a nod to the past and a hopeful glance towards the future, a sentiment that resonated across the social spectrum. It was the perfect way to cap off the evening before heading into a new year filled with opportunities, challenges, and undoubtedly more questionable fashion choices. In essence, Victorian New Year's festivities were a mirror of the era itself. full of contradictions, brimming with optimism, and wrapped in a thick layer of propriety. They were a time when tradition met innovation, where the old world reluctantly shook hands with the new. And as the clock struck midnight, the hopes of a nation hung in the balance, ready to face whatever the future held, corsets and all. But let's not get too swept away by the image of Victorians singing Auld Lang Syne in unison, misty-eyed and sentimental. These were also people who, fueled by the spirit of progress, took New Year's resolutions to a whole new level, an obsession, if you will. The Victorians loved their lists, and why not? In an era defined by order and propriety, what could be more satisfying than putting one's life into neat, bullet-pointed plans? Victorian diaries are treasure troves of such resolutions, brimming with ambitions that ranged from the mundane to the downright peculiar. Take, for instance, the diary of Lady Charlotte Coatsworth from 1865, where she solemnly resolved to read less novels and more sermons. Clearly, the Victorian sense of fun was as stiff as their upper lips. Others aimed to improve their character in ways that today might seem quaint. One gentleman, Mr. Augustus Hare, resolved in 1860 to become more amiable, more punctual, and less sarcastic. Someone should have told him he was well ahead of his time. Sarcasm would become a hallmark of British humour a century later. But not all resolutions were about personal betterment. The Victorians were nothing if not ambitious in their quest for social advancement. Resolutions often reflected a desire to climb the social ladder, like the one penned by a Mrs. Eliza Parker in her 1872 diary, to entertain more and be entertained by those of higher station. Ah, social climbing, the sport of the genteel. Now, let's talk about another curious tradition that marked the new year: first footing. This was a superstition that who first crossed your threshold after midnight could influence your fortune for the entire year. Ideally, this first footer was a tall, dark, and handsome man, not because the Victorians were particularly romantic, but because such a fellow was considered lucky. A blonde or redhead was thought to bring bad luck, a superstition rooted in the fear of Viking invasions. Talk about holding a grudge. First footing was an interesting intersection of superstition and social hierarchy. It wasn't just about luck, it was also about displaying one's social connections. A prominent first footer was a feather in one's cap, a sign of being well connected. And if you could snag a first footer who was both lucky and influential, well, you were practically golden for the year. Then, of course, there was the role of alcohol in these celebrations. While the stereotype of the buttoned-up, teetotaling Victorian might persist, the truth is a bit more spirited, quite literally. Alcohol was a staple of New Year's celebrations, and not just in the form of genteel sherry or port. Beer and gin flowed freely, especially among the working classes. In fact, the gin epidemic of the early 18th century was still casting a shadow, with gin being dubbed mother's ruin for its association with poverty and moral decay. Despite this, the Victorian era saw the rise of temperance movements that sought to curb alcohol consumption. The Band of Hope, founded in 1847, was particularly zealous, promoting total abstinence among children in a bid to shape future generations. But for every temperance advocate wagging a finger, there were plenty who raised a glass. By the late 19th century, the average annual consumption of alcohol in Britain was about 30 gallons per person. That's a lot of toasts to the new year. The tension between indulgence and restraint was palpable. While many Victorians embraced the party spirit, others viewed the celebrations as a moral battleground. The press often ran stories about the dangers of drunken revelry, painting a picture of a society teetering on the edge of chaos. But let's be real. The Victorians were nothing if not pragmatic. They understood that a little tipple was often necessary to endure the long winter nights and even longer sermons. It's easy to romanticize the Victorian era as one of strict morals and rigid social codes, but beneath the petticoats and top hats lay a society grappling with change. The new year was a moment of reflection and resolution, yes, but also a time when the tensions of progress and tradition bubbled to the surface. The Victorians might have been obsessed with propriety, but they were also captivated by the promise of a new beginning, one that could be toasted with a glass of champagne or a pint of ale, depending on one's station. As the clock struck midnight, the streets would fill with revellers, their voices mingling in the crisp night air. It was a time when the barriers of class seemed momentarily blurred, if only by the haze of alcohol and the promise of new beginnings. In this shared moment, the hopes and fears of a nation were laid bare, as they looked towards a future that was as uncertain as it was filled with possibility. And so, the Victorian New Year was a microcosm of the era itself, full of contradictions, aspirations, and a healthy dose of human folly. As they resolved to be better, luckier, or simply more entertaining, the Victorians were much like us, hopeful dreamers standing on the brink of a new year, armed with little more than a list of resolutions and a glass of something strong. So, as the Victorians stood on the brink of yet another year, with resolutions clutched in one hand and a dubious cocktail in the other, let's peel back the velvet curtain on the economics of their grand celebrations. Brace yourself. Beneath the lace doilies and polished silver was a world of cold, hard cash, a reality that, like a corset, was both supportive and suffocating. Picture this. You're a middle-class Victorian host, and you've just decided to throw a New Year's bash that would make even Dickens' Ghost of Christmas Present do a double-take. The guest list is longer than a Victorian novel, and the pressure to impress is as high as your great-uncle's top hat. First, on the agenda, the dinner. A lavish spread could set you back about £5, roughly £600 in today's money. And what did you get for your investment? A table groaning under the weight of roast beef, turkey, mince pies, and a pudding so dense it might exert its own gravitational pull. Of course, the dinner was just the opening act. Next came the fireworks, both literal and figurative. The Victorians loved a good display, and while they might not have had the pyrotechnics of today's big-budget shows, they did have gunpowder and a devil-may-care attitude towards safety. A decent fireworks display could cost another £2 or so, adding a couple hundred modern quid to your tab. But hey, what's a little financial pyrotechnics among friends? And let's not forget the party attire. For the ladies, a new dress for the occasion could easily cost £3 to £4. This wasn't just any dress, mind you, but a creation that could rival the drapery at Buckingham Palace. With layers of silk and lace, and a crinoline that could double as a small tent, these dresses were both a fashion statement and a financial burden. Meanwhile, gentlemen had their own sartorial pressures. A tailored suit might set them back around £2, and if they really wanted to impress, a silk top hat could tip the scales at another 10 shillings. But wait, there's more. No Victorian party would be complete without music, and hiring a string quartet for the evening could cost yet another £2. That's if you were feeling particularly posh, and wanted to avoid the local fiddler whose repertoire consisted mostly of greensleeves and the occasional sea shanty. Now, let's talk gifts. The tradition of Christmas and New Year gift-giving was gaining traction, and with it, the commercial boom that would have modern marketers drooling. Wasn't just about giving. It was about showing you could give. Advertisements from the era reveal a burgeoning consumer culture, with everything from luxury items like engraved silverware to novelty trinkets clogging the presses. The Illustrated London News, a kind of 19th century Instagram, was brimming with ads urging readers to buy the latest must-have items for the season. Sound familiar? The financial strain of keeping up with the Joneses, or the Thackerays, was palpable. Many households would have found themselves stretched thinner than the icing on a Victorian plum cake. That holiday cheer could quickly turn to post-party panic as the bills rolled in, a tradition that, let's face it, hasn't changed much in 2 centuries. And then there were the social expectations. Victorians didn't just party, they performed. Invitations needed to be reciprocated and appearances maintained. It wasn't unusual for a family to spend an entire year's savings on a single event, hoping to secure a place in the social pecking order. The irony here, while the Victorians were busy perfecting the art of genteel living, they were also laying the groundwork for what we now call keeping up with the Kardashians. This financial juggling act was all part of the great Victorian balancing act. One foot in the past with its rigid class structures, other stepping tentatively into a future of industrial capitalism. As industries boomed, so did the opportunities for social mobility and the desire to display one's newfound status. In a world where a single party could make or break your social standing, the stakes were as high as a chimney sweep's ladder. But let's not forget the darker side of this festive facade. For many, the new year was less about glittering balls and more about grinding realities. The working class, picking up the bulk of the population, often couldn't afford such lavishness. A factory worker might earn only £50 a year, and with the cost of living what it was, even a modest celebration was a stretch. For them, New Year might mean a pint at the local pub and a hope that the coming year would bring better wages and fewer hours, a stark contrast to the opulence enjoyed by their wealthier counterparts. And yet, the allure of the Victorian New Year's celebration remains. There's a romantic charm to the image of gaslit streets, champagne toasts, and the soft strains of a waltz wafting through the air. But the reality was that these festivities were as much about economic survival as they were about merrymaking. The Victorians were navigating a new world, one where old customs met new pressures, and where the shine of a party could mask the tarnish of debt and duty. In the end, the economics of a Victorian New Year celebration reveal a society in transition, grappling with the challenges of modernity while clinging to the comforts of tradition. It was a time of great change and even greater expectations, where the line between celebration and obligation was as thin as the ice on the Thames. And as the clock struck midnight, ringing in another year filled with both hope and hardship, the Victorians toasted not just to the year that lay ahead, but to the resilience that had brought them this far. So, as we leave our Victorian friends to their midnight musings and merriment, let's keep in mind that behind every grand party and glittering gown was a story of economic ambition and social aspiration. The Victorian New Year was more than just a celebration. It was a complex dance of tradition and transformation, a microcosm of an era that continues to fascinate, and dare we say, resonate even today. As the glow of the Victorian New Year celebrations faded into the cold light of a January morning, the party was over, at least for some. You see, the dawn of the new year in Victorian England didn't just reveal the remnants of fireworks and empty champagne glasses. It also laid bare the stark social and political divides that quietly simmered beneath the festive veneer. If you thought the Victorians were all about unity in their top hats and corsets, think again. This was a society where class and gender dynamics played out like an elaborate game of chess, with rules as rigid as a starched collar. Let's start with the upper crust, the folks whose parties we've been crashing in our time-traveling fancy. For them, New Year's was an exercise in extravagance, a chance to flaunt wealth with the subtlety of a peacock in a dove's nest. Think of lavish balls in grand, gas-lit homes, where the chandeliers sparkled as much as the diamonds around the ladies' necks. The guest list was a who's who of the social elite, a veritable red carpet event without the carpet, but with plenty of red wine. But while the upper class was busy foxtrotting their way into the new year, the working poor were left to waltz with harsh realities. For them, New Year's was less about celebration and more about survival. Many worked through the festivities, their new year marked not by resolutions, but by the relentless grind of factory life. A textile mill worker in Manchester, for example, might earn a meagre 10 shillings a week, barely enough to keep bread on the table, let alone fund a night of revelry. For these folks, the idea of a unified society was as far-fetched as an automaton serving afternoon tea. And where did gender roles fit into this social tapestry? Well, let's just say the Victorian era wasn't exactly a beacon of gender equality. Women, particularly in the upper echelons, were expected to be the perfect hostesses, orchestrating parties with the precision of a military operation, minus the uniforms, but not the hierarchy. Their role was to be seen and not heard, to adorn the party like another piece of fine china. Meanwhile, their husbands conducted the business of networking and decision-making, the real power plays made over cigars and brandy in rooms adorned with dark wood paneling and even darker conversations. For the women of the working classes, New Year's was less about hosting and more about hustling. They were often the unseen backbone of the celebrations, the scullery maids and kitchen hands who toiled long hours to ensure the champagne was chilled and the silverware gleamed. While their employers danced the night away, these women worked tirelessly, their contributions to the celebrations as invisible as the steam rising from the kitchen stoves. This brings us to the myth of a unified Victorian society, a charming illusion that crumbles under scrutiny. The notion that the new year could bring all classes together, even for a fleeting moment, is as romantic as it is misleading. Sure, everyone might have joined in a chorus of Auld Lang Syne, but the harmony was only superficial. The reality was a society deeply divided, with social mobility more of a pipe dream than a genuine possibility for most. Even the middle class, those newly minted beneficiaries of the Industrial Revolution, were navigating a precarious path. They were eager to emulate the aristocracy, but the economic pressures of maintaining appearances often left them teetering on the edge of financial ruin. A middle-class family's New Year celebration might have included a modest party, but the cost of keeping up appearances was a constant source of anxiety. It was a game of social Jenga, where a single misstep could send the whole tower of aspirations tumbling down. And yet, despite these divides, the Victorians clung to the hope of a new beginning with the tenacity of a corset's laces. The new year was a chance to reset, to dream of a better world where the past year's struggles could be left behind. It was a time when the collective hopes and fears of a society were distilled into resolutions, superstitions, and celebrations that, while varied, were universally human in their desire for progress and prosperity. In many ways, the Victorian New Year was a microcosm of the era itself, a time of contradictions and complexities, where tradition met innovation, and where the old social order was both challenged and reinforced. It was a society on the cusp of modernity, grappling with the growing pains of industrialization, yet still anchored to the traditions of the past. As the echoes of Auld Lang Syne faded into the night, the Victorian revellers returned to their lives, each carrying their own hopes and burdens into the new year. For some, it was a return to grandeur and opulence; for others, a continuation of toil and perseverance. But all were bound by the shared experience of time marching on, of standing at the threshold of another year with the promise and uncertainty that it held. So, as we tiptoe out of the Victorian era's grandiose New Year's parties and into the reality of their divided world, we're left to ponder the complexities of a society that, much like our own, was far from unified. The Victorians, with their peculiar blend of restraint and revelry, remind us that history is never as straightforward as it seems. Behind every glittering celebration lies a story of struggle and aspiration, a testament to the enduring human spirit in the face of both change and tradition. And that, dear friends, is a tale worth toasting to, even if it's with a cup of tea instead of champagne. As the last echoes of Auld Lang Syne faded into the night, the Victorian revellers returned to their lives, each carrying their own hopes and burdens into the new year. Yet, what remains of those corseted celebrations in our modern New Year's Eve? Well, quite a bit actually, but with a twist, a 21st century remix, if you will. Let's start with the obvious: New Year's resolutions. The Victorians practically invented the art of promising to be a better version of oneself, even if the follow-through was as reliable as a train running on Victorian-era timetables. Today, we continue this tradition with gusto, jotting down grand plans to hit the gym, quit vices, or finally read that classic novel collecting dust. But unlike Lady Charlotte's vow to swap novels for sermons, our resolutions often involve more self-indulgence than self-denial. It's all about New Year, New Me, a mantra as timeless as it is impractical. Then there's the party spirit. The Victorians could throw a bash, no doubt, and while today's gatherings might skip the crinoline and top hats, they're still fueled by that same desire to see out the old year with a bang. Modern fireworks displays have evolved from backyard gunpowder shows into synchronized pyrotechnic extravaganzas that light up global landmarks. But the essence remains, ringing in the new year with spectacle and a touch of danger, though hopefully fewer accidental singed eyebrows than in the 19th century. And what about the booze? Oh, the Victorians would feel right at home with our champagne-soaked celebrations. While they balance their sherry with temperance lectures, we simply accept our hangovers as the price of admission. Today's revellers, much like their Victorian counterparts, use alcohol to blur the lines between social classes, at least for a night. Whether it's a fancy cocktail party or a dive bar's countdown, the spirit of communal celebration endures, albeit with craft beer instead of gin-laden punch. Speaking of social dynamics, let's talk about how the new year serves as a great class equalizer, or at least tries to. The Victorian era saw the working class peering in from the fringes of grand balls, but now, thanks to TV broadcasts and social media, everyone can join the party. Whether it's the glittering ball drop in Times Square or the fireworks over Sydney Harbour, modern technology connects us across continents, allowing anyone with Wi-Fi to partake in the global festivities. It's a democratized version of the Victorian ball, minus the invite-only guest list. And how could we forget Auld Lang Syne? Even if most of us can only mumble through the first verse, this tradition has crossed centuries, uniting generations in a nostalgic embrace. The song's themes of friendship and reflection are universal, resonating just as powerfully today as they did in the candlelit parlours of Victorian England. Robert Burns' words serve as a timeless reminder of the ties that bind us, even as we step boldly into the unknown. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the myth of New Year's magic. Back then, Victorians clung to superstitions like first footing, hoping for good fortune from the first visitor of the year. Today, we may not wait for a tall, dark, and handsome man to cross our thresholds, but we do engage in our own rituals, midnight kisses, lucky foods, and even the tossing of confetti as a symbolic gesture of renewal. The romantic notion that January 1st holds transformative power persists, a comforting illusion that perhaps this year will be different, better, brighter. But not everything from the Victorian New Year's has aged well. For instance, the pressure to maintain appearances, while still very much alive in the Instagram era, has thankfully shed some of its more rigid constraints. Gone are the days when a new dress could sink a family's finances. Today, thrift stores and fast fashion allow us to change our looks without the financial fallout, though the environmental cost is another story. Thankfully, we've also moved beyond the gender roles that confined women to the role of decorative hostess. Now, anyone can take the lead in hosting duties, proving that a good party knows no gender. And let's tip our hats to the absence of the Victorian obsession with social climbing. While networking is still an Olympic sport for some, the stakes are nowhere near as life-altering as they once were. Today, the new year is less about securing a spot in society and more about personal milestones and shared experiences. We've traded the pressure of societal expectations for the pursuit of personal fulfillment, a shift that reflects broader changes in how we view success and happiness. In conclusion, our modern New Year celebrations are a patchwork quilt of Victorian traditions and contemporary innovations. We've inherited their love for resolutions, parties, and collective reflection, but we've also redefined these customs to fit our more egalitarian and globalized world. The essence of New Year's Eve, hope for the future, reflection on the past, and a desire to connect with others, remains unchanged. And as we count down those final seconds, we join a long line of revelers who have dared to dream, each clinking glass an echo of the past and a promise for tomorrow. So, as you raise your glass this New Year's Eve, spare a thought for our Victorian predecessors. Their world may have been vastly different, but their desire for renewal and celebration resonates across time. And whether you're singing Auld Lang Syne or simply savoring the silence of a new year dawning, remember, you're part of a grand tradition, one that stretches back through history, binding us together in the shared human experience of facing the future with hope and a touch of trepidation. Cheers to that, and to all the years yet to come. Long before your holiday season was hijacked by a jolly man in a red suit and a reindeer with a nose like a traffic light, Christmas was already on a world tour, thanks to the Silk Road. Yes, that dusty, arduous 4,000-mile stretch of land that connected the Roman Empire to the Han Dynasty in China. Think of it as the ancient world's version of the Internet, except slower and with more camels. The origins of Christmas, of course, start with the birth of Jesus Christ, an event that, according to Christian tradition, happened sometime around 4 to 6 BCE. But it took a few centuries before the holiday we now call Christmas began to take shape, growing from a humble celebration of Jesus' birth to a full-blown festival. The early Christian missionaries, fueled by equal parts faith and a dash of wanderlust, saw the Silk Road not just as a highway for silk and spices, but as a golden opportunity to spread their new religion. And frankly, they were more persistent than your average door-to-door salesperson. Now, let's get this straight. These missionaries weren't just trudging along with nothing but their sandals and a hearty God bless you. They were savvy operators, understanding that trade routes weren't just about goods. They were about ideas, beliefs, and customs. They were well aware that to spread Christianity, they needed to make it appealing to a diverse audience along the Silk Road. Picture them as early adopters of cultural synergy, blending Christian traditions with local ones in ways that would make any modern marketer proud. The economic incentive was undeniable. The Silk Road was the lifeline of trade and commerce, and if you wanted to make it big, you had to get in on the action. Early missionaries realized that by embedding themselves within these trade networks, they could not only spread their faith, but also tap into the wealth and influence that flowed along these routes. In a way, they were the spiritual venture capitalists of their time, investing in cultural exchange. But let's not romanticize it too much. The journey wasn't all spiritual enlightenment and warm welcomes. The Silk Road was notoriously treacherous, with bandits ready to relieve you of your earthly possessions, and harsh climates that could turn a camel ride into a survival expedition. Yet, these missionaries persisted, driven by a faith stronger than the appeal of a hot bath and a warm bed. As these brave souls trekked across deserts and mountains, they encountered a myriad of cultures, each with their own rich tapestry of beliefs and traditions. The merging of Christmas with local customs was not a simple matter of slapping a new label on an old bottle, but rather a complex negotiation of meanings and values. In the Zoroastrian regions of Persia, for example, the idea of light overcoming darkness found a deep resonance with the Christian narrative of Christ as the light of the world. Meanwhile, in Central Asia, the use of evergreen boughs during winter celebrations began to intertwine with the symbolism of eternal life found in Christian teachings. It's easy to see why the myth of a harmonious cultural exchange is so appealing. Who doesn't love a feel-good story of unity and shared humanity? But the reality was often messier. Cultural misunderstandings were common, and sometimes the missionaries' message was as clear as a foggy morning. Yet, through persistence and adaptation, the seeds of Christmas began to take root in these far-flung lands. So, while modern Christmas might feel like a chaotic blend of consumerism, nostalgia, and family drama, its history on the Silk Road was no less complex. It was a time of cultural fusion, economic ambition, and yes, a fair bit of trial and error. The next time you unwrap a gift or sip on some eggnog, remember that your holiday cheer owes a debt to those intrepid travelers who carried their beliefs across continents, all while navigating the wild, wild Silk Road. If you're still with me, let's dive deeper into the big owl melting pot of culture that was the Silk Road. Imagine the Roman Empire, a place where togas were the height of fashion and a good gladiator fight was just another Saturday afternoon. Picture these Romans, bustling with ambition, and the kind of civic pride that only comes from building aqueducts that still make modern engineers weep. Now, these folks were no strangers to celebrations, but throw in a little Christmas cheer, courtesy of those persistent Christian missionaries, and you've got a recipe for some delightful cultural misunderstandings. The Roman Saturnalia, a festival that could make even the most extravagant office Christmas party look like a quiet night-in, was an end-of-year blowout that included gift-giving, feasting, and a temporary social role reversal where slaves could be, well, not slaves for a day. It's not hard to see why the early Christians, who were masters of adaptation, might see an opportunity here. Hey, let's take this wild, bacchanalian festival and sprinkle a little Jesus on it, they thought. It worked, sort of. The Romans, with their love for excess, likely took the idea of Christmas and ran with it, straight into the arms of revelry, and let's be honest, probably a few too many amphorae of wine. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't a one-way street. The Romans, with their penchant for absorbing cultures like a sponge in a rainstorm, weren't just passive recipients. They actively shaped the way Christmas evolved. Take the date of December 25th, for example. Wasn't pulled out of thin air, but was likely chosen to coincide with the Roman festival of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, celebrated around the winter solstice. The symbolism of light in the bleakest time of year dovetailed nicely with the Christian message of hope and salvation. Clever, those early Christians. Meanwhile, over in the Han dynasty, things were a bit different. The Han were masters of bureaucracy and innovation, credited with everything from paper to the wheelbarrow. They were also deeply spiritual, with a rich tapestry of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. So when the idea of Christmas came knocking, it had to elbow its way through a crowded room of beliefs. The Han were intrigued by the idea of a universal savior, but their interpretation was, let's say, unique. The birth of Jesus was seen less as an event to commemorate with trees and tinsel, and more as an interesting philosophical footnote. After all, they had their own traditions to uphold, like the winter solstice festival, which was more about family reunions and less about stuffing stockings. And let's not forget the Persians, who were also players in this grand cultural exchange. The Zoroastrian tradition of Yalda, a celebration of the longest night of the year, resonated with the Christian narrative of light and salvation. Here was a culture that appreciated the metaphor of darkness turning to light, yet they weren't about to swap their fire temples for nativity scenes. But the exchange wasn't just about spiritual enrichment. The Silk Road was also about hard currency, and the economic motivations were as strong as the heady scent of frankincense that permeated the trade caravans. The Christians weren't just spreading the good word, they were also spreading goods. Artisans and merchants capitalized on the demand for religious icons and relics, crafting items that were as much about faith as they were about profit. Yet, for every seamless blend of culture, there were moments of pure chaos. Picture a well-meaning Roman merchant trying to explain the concept of a virgin birth to a Confucian scholar while bartering over silk prices, or a Central Asian trader introducing evergreens into his winter deka, only to find the local wildlife a bit too interested in his festive display. The Silk Road was less a smooth superhighway of cultural exchange and more a bumpy ride, full of potholes and wrong turns. As diverse as these interactions were, they shared a common thread, the power of adaptation and the undeniable pull of human curiosity. Despite the misunderstandings and mishaps, the essential message of Christmas, that of hope, renewal, and a fresh start, managed to find its way into the hearts of people from Rome to China. It's a testament to the tenacity of those early missionaries and the allure of new ideas, even when wrapped in foreign traditions. So, as you start your holiday season, remember that Christmas as we know it is a sprawling tapestry woven with threads from every corner of the ancient world. It's a holiday that, like the Silk Road itself, is a testament to the human spirit's ability to connect, adapt, and occasionally laugh at its own absurdities. And as we move forward in our journey, let's keep in mind that the story of Christmas on the Silk Road is far from over. There are more tales to tell, more myths to bust, and yes, more historical bloopers to uncover. Stay tuned for the next leg of our journey, where we'll see how this cultural cocktail continued to evolve, leaving a legacy that would shape celebrations for centuries to come. As we roll into the economic nitty-gritty of Christmas on the Silk Road, brace yourself for the intersection of spirituality and capitalism. This is where camels, commerce, and a touch of chaos collide. The Silk Road wasn't merely a scenic route for spreading religious fervor. It was a bustling artery of trade where merchants juggled goods and ideas like medieval stand-up comedians trying to gauge an audience's mood. First off, let's talk logistics, because nothing says Merry Christmas like a good old-fashioned supply chain headache. Transporting goods was a Herculean task, and not just because Hercules himself would have struggled to lift some of these loads. Caravans of camels, those ships of the desert with their uncanny ability to look both wise and utterly unimpressed, were the primary method of moving merchandise. A caravan could stretch up to 1,000 animals strong, with each dromedary capable of carrying around 300 pounds. And don't romanticize this with images of leisurely strolling camels. They moved at a plodding pace of about 25 miles a day, provided the terrain was agreeable and nobody got sand in their eye. The cost of moving goods wasn't just measured in silver or silk. It was a complex web of bartering, bribery, and bargaining. Take, for instance, the cost of silk itself, which could go for as much as 10 grams of gold per pound by the time it reached Rome. This was a far cry from its relatively modest starting price in China, where the stuff was practically woven into the wallpaper. Transporting it across the harsh landscapes of Central Asia through territories peppered with bandits and border disputes added a hefty premium. Merchants had to factor in bribes to local chieftains, taxes levied by city-states, and the occasional camel maintenance fee, when one of their animals decided it was time to retire from the caravan life. Currencies were as diverse as the goods being traded. The Romans loved their denarii, while the Chinese were fond of their washu coins, complete with the iconic square hole in the middle. Meanwhile, Central Asians might have been peddling in drachmas or the odd Byzantine solidus. It was a veritable buffet of currencies, each with its own exchange rate that could make your head spin faster than a merry-go-round on double espresso. Merchants had to be part economist, part linguist, and full-time diplomat just to keep their balance sheets in order. And then there were the unexpected hits of the holiday season. While you might think of frankincense and myrrh as the quintessential gifts of the Magi, they were just the tip of the iceberg. These aromatic resins fetched a high price, sure, but other commodities also found their moment in the limelight. Take saffron, for instance. This fragrant spice was worth its weight in gold, literally, and became an unexpected Christmas favorite, likely because it spruced up otherwise bland winter dishes with a pop of color and flavor. Who knew that something harvested from crocus flowers could become the bling of ancient spice racks? Spices, of course, weren't just culinary delights. They were also status symbols. To own them was to flaunt your wealth, like ancient Instagram posts screaming, "Look at me, I've made it." But it wasn't all saffron dreams and frankincense fantasies. Transporting these goods was akin to playing a high-stakes game of Tetris, trying to maximize every inch of space, while ensuring that your goods didn't spoil or get pilfered by sticky-fingered bandits. And let's not ignore the role of religious artifacts in this economic tapestry. Relics and icons were hot commodities, and while their spiritual value was, of course, priceless, their market value was something entirely different. You might think selling pieces of saintly bones or slivers of the true cross was a modern-day scam, but these items flew off the shelves faster than you could say indulgence. Demand was high, and supply was, well, as infinite as the imagination of the merchants who discovered these relics. Yet, for all the economic frenzy, there was a method to the madness. The Silk Road's trade networks were nothing short of a marvel, a testament to human ingenuity, and a reminder that even in ancient times, people could turn a profit out of practically anything. The sheer diversity of goods, silk, spices, precious metals, and religious trinkets created a trade environment that was as complex as it was lucrative. And while the rewards were great, so were the risks, with merchants often gambling everything on a single caravan. So, as you picture those early Christmas trades, remember that they were less about serene nativity scenes and more about the clinking of coins, the rustle of silk, and merchants haggling over the price of saffron. It was a world where faith met finance, and while the two didn't always blend seamlessly, they certainly kept things interesting. In this swirling mix of commerce and culture, Christmas found a way to embed itself into the very fabric of the Silk Road. It was a holiday that didn't just hitch a ride on the back of a camel. It commanded its own caravan. And as we look to the next part of our story, we'll see how this economic engine continued to evolve, leaving behind a legacy that would shape not just holidays, but entire economies for generations to come. Stay with me as we explore the next chapter in this epic journey, where we'll delve into the political and social factors that helped or hindered this festive march across continents. And so, from the clinking of coins on the Silk Road, we pivot to the swirling dance of diplomacy, political chess, and the less-than-holy motives that sometimes hitched a ride with the Christmas message. Was Christmas on the Silk Road really a come-bear moment of peace and goodwill, or were these festive exchanges more about power plays and political maneuvering than we'd like to admit? Let's dive into the tangled web of politics and myths that wrapped around the holiday like a particularly festive but slightly uncomfortable holiday sweater. First, let's address the elephant, or rather, the camel, in the room. The idea that Christmas on the Silk Road was all about peace and goodwill is as much a myth as a snowstorm in the Sahara. Sure, the holiday brought people together, and yes, there were moments of genuine cultural exchange. But often, underneath the veneer of merrymaking, there were deeper, more strategic games afoot. The Silk Road was a geopolitical hotbed, and every merchant, missionary, and monarch knew it. Consider the Roman Empire, an entity that wasn't exactly known for its laid-back attitude. The Romans were all about expansion, and they saw the Silk Road as an extension of their reach, a way to influence and control not just trade. It's said that Augustus, the first Roman emperor, once remarked that he'd rather be the first man in a village than the second in Rome, a sentiment that speaks volumes about the Roman approach to power. So when the Romans embraced Christmas, it wasn't purely for its spiritual message. It was a way to extend their influence, to show their softer, more civilized side to potential allies, and let's be honest, to keep their enemies guessing. Over in the Persian Empire, things were equally complex. The Persians had a long-standing rivalry with Rome, and the Silk Road was one of the battlegrounds of influence. For the Persians, embracing elements of Christmas wasn't just about spiritual curiosity, it was about cultural diplomacy. By incorporating aspects of Christian tradition into their own, they could engage with Roman traders and missionaries on more equal footing. It was a classic case of keeping your friends close and your enemies closer, though in this case, sometimes it was hard to tell which was which. Meanwhile, in the East, the Chinese Han dynasty had its own version of holiday politics. The Han emperors were masters of bureaucracy and diplomacy, and they understood the value of appearing open to foreign ideas while maintaining a firm grip on their own traditions. By allowing a controlled flow of Christmas customs into their empire, they could foster trade relations and gather intelligence on the political climate of their trading partners. It was a delicate balance of openness and control, a high-wire act that required the precision of an acrobat and the cunning of a fox. All right, let's tackle another popular myth, the notion that the Christmas truce, those magical moments of peace and understanding, was a regular occurrence on the Silk Road. The truth is, these truces were as rare as a snow leopard sighting. The Silk Road was a place of constant tension, where political alliances shifted as frequently as the sands of the Gobi Desert. Sure, there were moments when hostilities paused, like when traders needed to pool resources to fend off bandits. But let's not romanticize these truces as grand gestures of peace. They were often pragmatic pauses, the calm before the storm, if you will. And speaking of storms, let's not forget the role of local rulers and chieftains, who were the real power players on the ground. These were the folks who controlled the passes, the ones who decided whether your caravan made it through unscathed or ended up as a cautionary tale. For them, Christmas was another tool in their arsenal, a way to negotiate better terms, to extract tributes, or to forge temporary alliances. They might have sung hymns with the missionaries, but you better believe they were counting the coins even as the last notes faded into the desert air. But wait, there's more. We also need to consider the role of espionage and subterfuge. The Silk Road was a veritable cloak and dagger theater, where spies and informants mingled with merchants and missionaries. The exchange of Christmas customs could sometimes serve as a cover for more clandestine activities. After all, what better way to gather intelligence than by joining a festive gathering, where tongues were loosened by mulled wine and the spirit of camaraderie? It's a tale as old as time. When the stakes are high, even the holiest of holidays can become a stage for intrigue. Despite all this, the romantic allure of the Silk Road Christmas persists. It's a narrative that appeals to our better angels, the idea of a holiday that transcends borders and brings people together. And while there's truth in that, because yes, Christmas did foster moments of genuine connection, it's essential to acknowledge the complexities and contradictions that made those moments possible. The Silk Road was a microcosm of the human experience, with all its light and shadow, its hope and its hubris. So, as we sift through the myths and legends of Christmas on the Silk Road, let's remember that history, like a good holiday punch, is a mix of ingredients. Some sweet, some bitter, and some that leave you questioning your life choices. The stories we tell ourselves about the past are as much about who we are today as they are about what happened back then. And as we continue this journey, we'll delve even deeper into the tangled tapestry of Christmas's journey across continents. A tale that's far from over, with new chapters waiting to be uncovered. Stick around as we prepare to dive into the social dynamics and the ever-evolving cultural cocktail that kept the Silk Road buzzing with holiday cheer and occasionally holiday chaos. And so, as we pull the last thread of Christmas from the tapestry of the Silk Road, let's talk about how these ancient exchanges have left their fingerprints on the holiday traditions we know today. You might be surprised to learn that your cozy Christmas Eve dinner, festive decor, and even the way you sip on that eggnog have echoes of a time when camels were the main mode of transport, and going viral meant surviving a particularly nasty desert bug. First, let's chew on the culinary fusions that have flavored Christmas celebrations. A modern holiday table is a smorgasbord of cultural influences, thanks in part to the Silk Road's epic culinary mashup. Take the ubiquitous Christmas pudding, For instance, it's a dish that owes a nod to the spices and fruits that traveled from the East. Imagine this. Without the Silk Road, your holiday dessert might still be a medieval porridge rather than a spiced, boozy extravaganza. Spices like cinnamon and nutmeg, which were once as valuable as gold, found their way into European kitchens, transforming bland dishes into festive delights. And that saffron we mentioned earlier, it's not just for paella. It's been sneaking its way into Christmas menus for centuries, adding a touch of luxury to holiday feasts. But the culinary cross-pollination doesn't stop there. The Middle East contributed to the tradition of nuts and dried fruits, staples that traveled well and added a delightful crunch or chew to holiday dishes. This fusion of flavors from around the world is like a culinary United Nations meeting on your plate, each ingredient with a passport, stamped with stories of trade and tradition. Now, let's unwrap the gifts of holiday rituals. Have you ever wondered why we bring evergreens into our homes during the darkest days of winter? This tradition, which dates back to pre-Christian times, was given a Christmas makeover along the Silk Road. The use of evergreens, symbolizing eternal life, resonated deeply with Christian teachings. This idea, mingled with local customs, evolved into the Christmas tree tradition we know today. And let's not forget the concept of gift-giving. While it might seem like a straightforward practice, it's a tradition with layers of meaning, reflecting the exchanges of goods and goodwill that were the lifeblood of the Silk Road. The practice of hanging stockings, too, has a backstory that weaves through the corridors of ancient trade. In some regions, it was common to place shoes or containers by the hearth, a nod to the idea that travelers and traders, who often relied on the hospitality of strangers, might leave small tokens of appreciation. It's a quaint thought that every gift might carry a whisper of gratitude from the road. And what about the music and carols that fill the air during the holiday season? Here again, the Silk Road's legacy lingers. The exchange of instruments and musical styles along these trade routes helped to create a rich tapestry of sound. Bells, an instrument with roots in the East, became a symbol of Christmas joy, their clear tones echoing through centuries of celebration. The harmonies and melodies we sing today are shaped by a blend of cultural influences, proof that music, like trade, knows no borders. Of course, all this talk of fusion and exchange might lead you to believe the process was seamless. But let's not kid ourselves. The blending of traditions was often as messy as a toddler's first attempt at decorating a Christmas tree. There were cultural clashes, misunderstandings, and more than a few awkward moments. Yet through it all, a new, shared understanding emerged, an imperfect but genuine connection that transcended differences. Now, as we wrap up this historical journey, let's reflect on the enduring legacy of these exchanges. The Silk Road wasn't just a highway for goods. It was a conduit for ideas, beliefs, and traditions that continue to shape our world. The Christmas celebrations of today are a testament to the power of human curiosity and adaptability. They've evolved over millennia, picking up bits and pieces from every culture they touched, like a snowball rolling down a hill, growing larger and more complex with each turn. So, what does this mean for us today? Well, next time you hang an ornament or take a bite of that spiced cookie, consider the layers of history that brought these traditions to your doorstep. Remember that the holiday season is itself a tapestry, woven with threads from every corner of the ancient world. It's a celebration of our shared humanity, a reminder that the best parts of our traditions often come from the most unexpected places. In the end, the story of Christmas on the Silk Road is a reminder of the beautiful complexity of cultural exchange. It's a tale of adaptation and innovation, of blending the old with the new to create something enduring. And as we celebrate this season, let's toast to the traders, missionaries, and everyday folks who, despite the odds, made it possible for us to enjoy the rich, diverse tapestry that is Christmas today. Here's to the legacy of the Silk Road, and to the enduring spirit of a holiday that, much like the road itself, continues to bring people together across time and space. Cheers. The morning of December 25, 1914, greets you with a cacophony that could best be described as a symphony conducted by a particularly aggressive percussionist. Boom! That's your alarm clock for today, distant artillery reminding you that even Christmas doesn't get a ceasefire from the Great War. As you pull yourself out of the damp embrace of a makeshift bed, You can almost hear Bing Crosby crooning about a white Christmas. But here, the only thing white is the frost clinging stubbornly to the mud. There's no escaping the trench, a cozy abode tailor-made by military minds who thought zigzagging ditches would shape the future of warfare. Spoiler alert. No one told them trenches would become synonymous with stalemate. As you stand up, your boots make a squelching sound, a giveaway that they're no longer just footwear, but a permanent part of the trench ecosystem. This is no ordinary mud. It's a concoction of water, dirt, and the ghosts of 1,000 failed strategies. Welcome to the Western Front, where the trench is not just a place, but a state of mind. Stretching from the North Sea to the Swiss border, the Western Front is a 400-mile-long scar on the face of Europe, a testament to what happens when industrialized nations decide to duke it out and forget to bring an exit strategy. The trenches themselves are a marvel of engineering, if your idea of engineering involves a lot of digging and very little planning. Built to zigzag for a reason, these ditches are designed to prevent enfilade fire, which is a fancy way of saying they make it harder for the enemy to hit you with a straight shot. If only life were that simple. In reality, these trenches are hotbeds of disease, discomfort, and despair, with a side of trench foot for good measure. And let's not forget the aroma, a delightful eau de trench, a blend of sweat, gunpowder, and the kind of existential dread that keeps philosophers up at night. You might be wondering why you're stuck in this muddy purgatory. It all started with the Schlieffen Plan, the German brainchild that aimed to avoid a two-front war by knocking out France before Russia could mobilize. But like all great plans, it hit a snag. Specifically, the Belgians didn't roll over, and the British Expeditionary Force decided to crash the party. By September 1914, the war of movement had ground to a halt, and both sides dug in for the long haul, creating this labyrinth of trenches that now define your world. But don't worry, you're not alone in this. There are thousands of soldiers from both sides sharing this less-than-glamorous Christmas morning. There's camaraderie in suffering, they say, though you'd probably trade a bit of that camaraderie for a hot meal and a bath. The truth is, trench life is a brutal equalizer. Whether you're a seasoned veteran or a fresh-faced recruit, the mud doesn't discriminate. It clings to you, seeps into your bones, and whispers sweet nothings about trench fever as you try to catch a few winks. The strategic genius behind the trench warfare was simple. Dig in and hold the line. Defensive positions were easier to maintain with fewer troops, allowing armies to stretch their lines over vast distances. But this strategy came at a cost. More than 10 million soldiers would become casualties of this war before it was all over, many of them on this very front. It's a grim reminder that while trenches were designed to protect, they also became the world's longest waiting room, where soldiers twiddled their thumbs between artillery barrages. As you peer over the top of the trench, careful to avoid becoming sniper bait, you see the no-man's land stretching out before you, a barren wasteland of craters and barbed wire. It's a mere 100 to 300 yards to the enemy lines, depending on where you are, but it might as well be 1,000 miles. Crossing it is a death sentence, yet it's a journey that countless young men have been ordered to make, time and time again. It's a place where the concept of a front line blurs into the absurdity of war. But let's not get too pessimistic. After all, it's Christmas. And while the mud may be universal, the spirit of the season occasionally finds a way to seep through the cracks. You've heard whispers of something extraordinary happening up and down the line today, tales of ceasefires and fraternization, of enemies exchanging gifts and carols instead of bullets. It's a story that would make Dickens proud, though he might have swapped Scrooge for a German infantryman and Tiny Tim for a British Tommy. Still, as you sip your morning tea, if you can call this lukewarm brew tea, you're reminded that the war isn't just fought with weapons but with wills. And today, for a brief moment, the will to find common ground might just triumph over the will to fight. It's enough to bring a flicker of hope to even the most battle-hardened heart. After all, history isn't just about the events that happen, but the people who live through them. And today, you're living it, one soggy step at a time. As you sip your morning tea, well, more like a lukewarm splash of optimism in a tin cup, you begin to ponder the logistical gymnastics that keep this war machine grinding. From this soggy trench, it might seem like supplies just appear like magic. But the reality is more like a circus act, with every nation juggling resources, manpower, and the occasional political crisis. Let's talk rations, the lifeblood of any soldier. Back in 1914, the British Army was issuing about 4,000 calories per day to each soldier. Sounds generous, right? But hold your horses, or rather your canned beef. The menu was as monotonous as a broken record. Bully beef, bread, and biscuits that could double as building materials. The Germans, not to be outdone, offered their troops Erbswurst, a pea and bacon sausage that was as appetizing as it sounds. And let's not forget about the French, whose soldiers had the dubious pleasure of dining on pain de guerre, a bread so dense it could have been a weapon in its own right. Now, how did all this sustenance make its way to the front lines? Enter the Quartermaster Corps, the unsung heroes of the trenches, who orchestrated the movement of supplies like a military ballet, minus the Tudors. Picture this: convoys of horse-drawn wagons, trains chugging through Europe like overworked workhorses, and ships braving the treacherous waters. It was a logistical feat of epic proportions, but in war, nothing ever goes perfectly. Supplies were often delayed, sometimes by enemy action, sometimes by good old-fashioned incompetence. But food was just one piece of the puzzle. Let's not forget the arms race happening in parallel. By Christmas 1914, the British had already fired over 1 million rounds of ammunition, and that was just the beginning. The Germans weren't slacking either, with their artillery pounding out a symphony of destruction. Keeping these guns fed was like trying to keep a teenager's smartphone charged, a relentless task that consumed resources like a black hole. And then there's the mystery of the missing dry socks. A soldier's life was a constant battle against trench foot, condition as delightful as its name suggests. Dry socks were worth their weight in gold, but getting them was like winning the lottery. Somehow, amidst the chaos, they always seemed to disappear into the ether, leaving soldiers to improvise with newspapers and whatever else they could find. It was a small but constant reminder that in war, comfort is a luxury, not a right. Now, let's pivot to the tale that's become the stuff of legend. The Christmas truce of 1914. Was it a true moment of peace, or just the war's version of a coffee break? On that fateful day, as stories go, soldiers from both sides tentatively emerged from their trenches, like groundhogs checking for their shadow. They met in no man's land, the stretch of dirt and despair that usually spelled doom, and exchanged gifts, cigarettes, chocolate, even the occasional souvenir button. Some even played football, because nothing says peace on earth like a friendly game of kickabout amid the craters. But let's not get too carried away by the hallmark version. The truce wasn't universal. It was a patchwork of ceasefires, with some units joining in while others continued business as usual, shells and all. And it wasn't exactly sanctioned by the higher-ups, who were probably shaking their heads and muttering about insubordination. The generals, safely removed from the mud and mire, saw fraternization as a dangerous precedent. After all, it's hard to fire on someone you've just shared a cigarette with. So, was the truce a genuine flicker of humanity, or just a blip in the madness? Perhaps it was a bit of both. For a brief moment, the soldiers on the ground, the ones living the grim reality of war, found a common ground that transcended orders and politics. It was a reminder that beyond the uniforms and barbed wire, they were all just human beings caught in a machine larger than themselves. As you consider this, the day wears on, and the war's relentless rhythm resumes. The artillery resumes its percussive conversation, and the trenches continue to swallow men and dreams alike. But the memory of that truce lingers, a ghostly echo of what could have been, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest of times, humanity can find a way to shine through, even if just for a day. So, as the echoes of the truce fade into the background, midday rolls in with the subtlety of a marching band. You find yourself in that odd lull between skirmishes, a time when soldiers become pen pals, philosophers, and makeshift merrymakers, trying to keep spirits up in the most un-Christmas-like of settings. It's a world where a letter from home becomes more precious than gold, and considering the inflation rate during wartime, that's saying something. Let's dive into the soldier's lifeline, the mail. At the front, letters are the bridge to sanity, a connection to a world less muddy and more hopeful. By Christmas 1914, the British Army Postal Service was handling around 12 million letters and parcels weekly. That's right, weekly. Imagine the logistics. Sorting, delivering, and reading all those missives by candlelight or whatever dim light happened to be available. It's a postal service on steroids, with the added challenge of dodging shells. These letters were a mix of banal and profound, from mothers worrying about their sons' coughs to sweethearts sending knitted socks and questionable poetry. A soldier might receive a note filled with the scent of lavender or a package with the latest issue of the Daily Mirror, albeit a few weeks late. It's a slice of normalcy in a world gone mad. And let's not forget the letters sent back home, where soldiers often downplayed the horrors, painting the trenches as a slightly damp camping trip rather than the muddy chaos they truly were. Now, what's a Christmas without some festivities, makeshift as they may be? Across the front, soldiers attempted to inject a little cheer into their dreary surroundings. Christmas trees adorned with makeshift decorations, think tin cans and bullet casings, sprung up in the trenches, while impromptu concerts broke out with soldiers belting out carols in a cacophony that would make any choir director wince. It's a testament to the human spirit that even in the depths of despair, people find ways to celebrate. But back home, the stories of these festivities took on a life of their own, thanks to the ever-creative spin doctors known as newspaper editors. The role of propaganda during the Great War was as strategic as any military maneuver. Newspapers were the cheerleaders of the home front, spinning tales of valor and heroism that often glossed over the grim realities. The Christmas truce, for example, was romanticized as a triumph of humanity over conflict, a narrative much more palatable than the truth of men returning to the business of war. The press served up stories that were part reality, part myth, with a side of national pride. Heroic tales of soldiers defying the odds and surviving against all expectations were headline material. And who could blame them? In times of war, people crave heroes and happy endings, even if they're more fiction than fact. The newspapers knew this, crafting narratives that would keep morale high and support unwavering, a necessity when the human cost was so high. Primary sources like letters and diaries provide a counterpoint to these tales, revealing the unvarnished truth of soldier life. Take, for instance, the diary of Private Horace Piper, who described trench life as a constant battle against boredom and fear, with the occasional interruption of terror. Or the letters of Captain Robert Hamilton, who wrote candidly about the ridiculous conditions and the ever-present mud that seemed to have a life of its own. These first-hand accounts offer a window into the daily grind of trench warfare, where survival often hinged on a mix of luck and sheer willpower. And speaking of willpower, attempts to keep spirits up weren't limited to carols and letters. Enter the world of trench art, where soldiers turned war detritus into keepsakes. Shell casings became vases, shrapnel was transformed into intricate sculptures, and every piece was a testament to creativity in the face of adversity. It was a way to pass time, to focus on something other than the next barrage or the ever-present stench of decay. As the day drags on, the war machines continue their relentless march. The artillery resumes its drumming, and soldiers settle back into their routines, the brief respite of the truce becoming a memory. Yet, the stories of that day linger, shared among comrades and sent home in letters that will become family heirlooms. These tales, a mix of fact and fantasy, will be retold and reshaped, eventually becoming part of the folklore of the Great War. And so, Midday in the Trenches is a tapestry of stories, both real and imagined, stitched together with the threads of human resilience. The soldiers, caught in the jaws of history, find ways to endure, to laugh, to create, and to hope. It's a reminder that even amidst the chaos, life finds a way to shine, one letter, one song, one shared moment at a time. As the sun begins its descent, the stories continue to circulate, each one adding to the rich tapestry of life on the front lines. The legend of the Christmas truce is just one thread in this complex weave, a poignant reminder of humanity's enduring spirit. But as night falls, there's still more to uncover in this tale of war and peace. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the lives of those who lived through this extraordinary time, exploring the myths, realities, and the indelible mark they left on history. As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows over the trench lines, you can almost feel the world shifting gears. While soldiers brace for another night in the mud, far from the front, leaders are ensconced in rooms that smell of cigars and ambition. These are the architects of the calamity, the ones who lit the fuse on the powder keg that was World War I. Let's rewind the clock a bit, shall we? The Great War, as it was optimistically dubbed, kicked off in 1914 like a bar brawl that got way out of hand. And like any good bar brawl, it started with a seemingly small incident. Specifically, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria on June 28, 1914, by a Bosnian Serb nationalist in Sarajevo. Talk about a domino effect. This single event set off a chain reaction of alliances and ultimatums that spiraled into full-blown conflict. Within a month, the major European powers were locked in a deadly embrace, each convinced they were the aggrieved party. So, why didn't cooler heads prevail? Well, the political landscape of early 20th century Europe was about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. You had the Triple Entente, France, Russia, and Britain, on one side, and the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, though Italy soon decided to sit this one out, then switched teams, on the other. It was a recipe for disaster, with everyone ready to jump into the fray at the slightest provocation, like a powder keg just waiting for a match. Fast forward to the trenches of 1914, and you have to wonder, why was this war dragging on instead of wrapping up like a bad first date? Part of it was technological. The industrial advances that powered the Second Industrial Revolution had turned warfare into a grim game of mechanical chess. Machine guns, artillery, and barbed wire created a brutal stalemate. The old-school tactics of cavalry charges and bayonet rushes were about as effective as bringing a spoon to a knife fight. Then there were the egos. Oh, the egos. Leaders like Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm Roman II, Britain's King George V, and Russia's Tsar Nicholas Roman II were more concerned with national prestige than peace. These were men who believed in concepts like honor and destiny, ideas that sound much grander when you're not the one knee-deep in muck. While soldiers froze in the trenches, these rulers enjoyed a comfy seat by the fire, sipping tea and strategizing from afar, blissfully removed from the horrors they perpetuated. And speaking of horrors, let's tackle the myth of the war to end all wars. It's a phrase that's been tossed around like a hot potato, often attributed to President Woodrow Wilson, though he never uttered those exact words. The idea was that this conflict was so devastating, so catastrophic, that humanity would finally learn its lesson. Spoiler alert, it didn't quite turn out that way. Instead, the war's aftermath sowed the seeds for future conflicts, most notably World War Roman II, proving once again that history has a dark sense of irony. But back to 1914, where the realities of war are far from the romanticized notions held by those in power. For the soldiers in the trenches, the war isn't about honor or destiny, it's about survival. The political decisions made in plush offices have very real, very bloody consequences on the ground. Orders to advance across no man's land are issued with the same casualness as deciding what's for lunch, yet they result in thousands of lives lost. It's a grim testament to the disconnect between the policymakers and those on the front lines. Meanwhile, back at home, the war effort is buoyed by a different kind of power play, propaganda. Governments on all sides are spinning tales that would make a fiction writer blush, glorifying their cause and demonizing the enemy. This isn't just about maintaining morale. It's about ensuring public support for a conflict that's bleeding nations dry. By 1914, Britain alone had spent approximately £377 million on the war effort, a staggering sum that would only balloon as the conflict stretched on. In this charged atmosphere, the concept of a just war is both a rallying cry and a convenient excuse. The reality, of course, is far murkier. This isn't a clash of good versus evil, but a messy tangle of alliances, grievances, and ambitions. And while the generals and politicians debate strategy, the soldiers endure the consequences, each day a grim reminder that war is hell, no matter how you dress it up. As evening falls, the trenches settle into an uneasy calm, the lull before the next storm of artillery fire. The day's stories, of truces and carols, of letters and longing, begin to fade, replaced by the ever-present reality of war. Yet, even in the darkness, there's a flicker of hope, a stubborn refusal to let despair take hold entirely. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the bleakest of times, there is light to be found. So as we close the chapter on this Christmas in the trenches, remember that the war is far from over. The decisions made by those far removed from the front lines continue to shape the lives of countless individuals. And while the legend of the Christmas truce offers a brief respite from the chaos, the engines of war grind on, driven by politics, power, and the unyielding march of history. Stay tuned, because this story isn't finished yet. There's still more to uncover in this tale of conflict and humanity. As the night casts its inky veil over the trenches, you find yourself reflecting on the day's strange juxtaposition of war and peace. The Christmas truce, a patchwork symphony of ceasefires, has left behind a haunting echo in the still, cold air. It's a curious and bittersweet pause in the cacophony of the Great War, an unexpected twist in a saga that, let's face it, was about as predictable as a soap opera. But before we get misty-eyed over this fleeting moment of humanity, let's peel back the layers of myth and reality. The Christmas truce of 1914 is often painted with the broad brushstrokes of romanticism. Enemies laying down arms to share cigarettes and songs, a spontaneous outbreak of good cheer in a place better known for its lethal choreography of bullets and bayonets. However, the truth is a bit more nuanced. For starters, the truce wasn't a universal experience. It was more like a patchwork quilt of peace, with some parts of the front engaging in hearty handshakes, while others were still trading artillery fire like it was going out of style. And the soldiers who did partake, they were driven by a mix of exhaustion, curiosity, and a desperate need for a sliver of normalcy, if only for a day. It's a testament to the human spirit that even amid the mud and misery, they found it within themselves to reach across the void of no man's land. Yet, this wasn't some grand gesture sanctioned by the powers that be. The generals and politicians, those architects of conflict, were less than thrilled about their troops getting chummy with the enemy. After all, it's hard to wage a war when your soldiers are busy swapping stories instead of shells. Orders were soon issued to prevent any future fraternization, as if the spirit of Christmas could be neatly boxed up and put back on the shelf until next December. And then there's the legend of the football match, which has taken on a life of its own. Did soldiers really play a game in the blasted wasteland of no man's land? Accounts vary. Some say it happened, with a ball kicked back and forth in a muddy approximation of the beautiful game. Others claim it's just a myth, a metaphor for the fleeting sense of camaraderie that briefly united sworn enemies. Either way, the story has become part of the folklore, a symbol of the potential for peace, even in the most unlikely places. Now, let's talk about the legacy of this day. The Christmas truce stands as a poignant reminder that even in the most dehumanizing circumstances, humanity can still shine through. It's a moment that defies the narrative of relentless violence and unyielding enmity. But it's also a sobering reflection on the power of propaganda and the narratives we choose to embrace. The truce has been romanticized over the years, transformed into a tale of hope and goodwill that often glosses over the harsh realities of war. Why do we cling to these romanticized versions of history? Perhaps it's because they offer a glimmer of hope amid the bleakness, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there are moments of light. Or maybe it's because they allow us to distance ourselves from the grim truths of conflict, to focus on the human spirit rather than the human cost. But while it's tempting to view the Christmas truce through rose-colored glasses, it's crucial to remember the lessons it offers about the complexities of war and peace. The truce was a rare event in a conflict defined by its brutality. It didn't stop the war or change its course, but it did provide a brief respite from the horror, a chance for soldiers to see one another as individuals rather than faceless enemies. And while the war machine would grind on, claiming millions of lives before its end in 1918, the memory of that day would linger, a ghostly reminder of what could have been. As you ponder these thoughts under the starlit sky, it's worth considering the broader implications of the truce. It serves as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to find common ground even when surrounded by chaos. But it's also a reminder of the importance of questioning the narratives we're fed, of looking beyond the myths to uncover the truths that lie beneath. The Christmas truce may have been a fleeting moment in a long and bloody conflict, but its legacy endures. It challenges us to reflect on the nature of war and the possibilities of peace, to seek understanding and connection in a world that too often divides. And as we look to the future, it encourages us to remember that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a tapestry woven from the experiences and stories of those who lived through it. So, as you drift off to sleep with these reflections in mind, let the story of the Christmas truce serve as a reminder that even in the darkest times, There is always room for light, always potential for change. It's a lesson that remains as relevant today as it was over a century ago, a call to remember the past, not just for what it was, but for what it can teach us about the future. Sunlight's barely nudging its way through the window slats when you're jerked awake by the sharp clatter of a wooden staff banging against the dormitory door. Welcome to another day in the life of a gladiator at the Ludus, where breakfast is served with a side of impending doom. You roll out of your straw mattress, because in ancient Rome, comfort is for the senators, not the sword swingers. You stretch, feeling the familiar creak of muscles still sore from yesterday's drills. There's no time for self-pity. Every moment here is about survival, but not the kind you'd romanticize over a cup of espresso. Gladiator training camps, or ludi, were the boot camps of the ancient world. Think of them as less sports academy and more prison with perks. You've got your gladiator trainers, known as Lannister, who are like personal trainers, but with a lot more yelling and a bit less lycra. The Lannister isn't just shouting to get you to run faster. He's protecting an investment. You see, training a gladiator was like buying a new car. Expensive upfront with hopes of a big return. A single gladiator could cost up to 3,000 denarii to train, a tidy sum that could buy you a decent house in the city. Breakfast is served, and by served, I mean you grab a bowl of barley mush and try not to think about how this is supposed to fuel you for the day. The Roman diet was all about carbs, the ancient equivalent of a high-performance protein shake, minus the flavor. Why barley, you ask? Because it's cheap and fills you up. You're not here to enjoy a culinary experience. You're here to become a fighting machine. As you finish your breakfast, let's talk gear. You're not strapping on the shiniest armor for your morning training session. The cost of gladiator armor and weapons could rival a small army's budget. A decent set of gear might set a Lannister back several thousand denarii, and that's not even counting the cost of maintenance. The armor is heavy, cumbersome, and definitely not designed with comfort in mind. But hey, it looks fantastic in the arena, right? People come to see a spectacle, not a comfort contest. The romantic image of the gladiator as the ultimate warrior is a bit of a mirage. Sure, people love to imagine the noble fighter, a hero in the arena, but the reality is you're more like a pawn in a very bloody game of chess. You fight because you must, not because you have some grand sense of honor. And let's not forget the economic angle. Every fight you win is more coin in the Lannister's pocket. Your worth is measured in victories and how much they can bet on you without losing their toga. Training begins with a series of exercises that could put a modern CrossFit session to shame. You're running, jumping, swinging weighted swords, all under the watchful eye of the Lannister, who seems to have a sixth sense for slacking. It's as much about building resilience as it is about building muscles. Ancient sources like the poet Juvenal tell us that a gladiator's life was brutal and short, but also oddly admired. Kind of like how we view rock stars burning out before their time. By mid-morning, you're drenched in sweat, and the sun's just getting started. Remember, you're not only fighting for your life, you're fighting for your future. Gladiators could win their freedom if they survived long enough, but statistically speaking, that's like betting on a three-legged horse. Yet the allure of glory and freedom keeps you swinging. Let's not kid ourselves. Being a gladiator was as much about economics as it was about entertainment. You're the star of the show, sure, but the real winners are the ones collecting the bets. The Lannister invests in you like a racehorse, hoping for a good return on investment. And those odds, well, they're stacked about as high as the Colosseum stands. As the sun peaks and training winds down, you get a chance to rest. But don't get too comfortable. Tomorrow, or perhaps sooner, you might be stepping into the arena where skill meets spectacle and the stakes are life and death. The crowd will cheer, the emperor may nod, and you'll be left to wonder if today's training was enough to make tomorrow possible. So, there you have it, a morning in the life of a gladiator. Romanticized in art and legend, but in reality, it's a grind of sweat, economic pressure, and survival instincts. The day's not over yet, but you've made it through another morning. And in this world, that's saying something. As the midday sun casts its relentless glare, you find yourself pondering the intricacies of your peculiar social standing. Sure, you're a gladiator, which means you're simultaneously revered and reviled. A living oxymoron if there ever was one. On one hand, you're a superstar of the sand and steel, a walking, fighting spectacle that fills the Colosseum's 50,000 seats. On the other, you're a glorified commodity, a pawn in the grand political game played by Rome's elite. Let's peel back the layers of this paradox, shall we? First, the hierarchy. It's like being part of a twisted corporate ladder, where the only promotion involves a sword through your opponent. At the bottom, you've got the common gladiators, the expendable cannon fodder of the arena. But climb a few rungs, and you reach the Lannister, your not-so-benevolent overlord. This guy's part drill sergeant, part venture capitalist. The Lannister owns you, literally. He shelled out those 3,000 denarii for your training and expects a return on investment. Think of him as the head of HR, procurement, and talent development all rolled into one, but with a penchant for blood sports. But above the Lannister, there's the patron, the real power behind your shield. This is the individual with deep pockets and political ambitions, the one who bankrolls your career and uses your victories as a stepping stone to greater influence. Patrons see gladiators as a means to an end, a way to curry favor with the masses and climb the political ladder. You are their walking campaign poster, and every fight you win is like a campaign rally with a lot more screaming and a bit more blood. The political machinery that fuels these games is nothing short of awe-inspiring or terrifying, depending on your perspective. The games serve as a pressure valve for the teeming masses of Rome. Bread and circuses, right? Keep the populace fed and entertained, and they won't notice the soaring unemployment or the fact that their streets double as sewage systems. It's a strategy so effective even modern politicians could take notes. The games are a tool of social control, a way to distract the public and reinforce the power of those who rule. Now, let's talk fame, or the myth of it, anyway. The romantic notion of the gladiator as a celebrated hero is, to put it delicately, a load of amphory. Sure, some gladiators became household names, like Spartacus or the unbeaten Flammer, but for most, glory was as fleeting as a Roman summer. You might get the odd cheer in the marketplace or a nod of recognition from a fan, but you're still a slave, a tool for entertainment. In reality, the fame you gain is a double-edged sword, as likely to get you into trouble as to get you out of it. And what about the allure of freedom? Yes, it's true that some gladiators could earn their freedom through repeated victories. The wooden sword, or rudies, was a symbol of liberation, a tangible reward for surviving the unthinkable. But let's not sugarcoat it. The odds were about as favorable as a snowstorm in the Sahara. Most gladiators met their end long before they could dream of freedom. To them, the rudies was more legend than attainable goal, a tantalizing mirage shimmering just out of reach. Societal expectations weigh heavily on your shoulders, too. You're expected to embody the virtues of strength and bravery, to be a model of Roman valor. But beneath the armor and bravado, you're just trying to stay alive, to avoid being the next casualty in a long line of fallen warriors. The pressure is relentless, as is the scrutiny. Every move you make, both in and out of the arena, is dissected by the public and your patrons alike. It's like living in a fishbowl, except the fish are armed and the water's been replaced with sand. So there you have it. Being a gladiator is more than just swinging swords and dodging death. It's navigating a complex web of social and political expectations, a balancing act between survival and spectacle. In a world where life is cheap and honor even cheaper, you're caught in the middle, a star in a brutal production where the show must always go on. The day marches on, and with it, the ever-present tension of what tomorrow might bring. It's a life of contradictions, but in Rome, that's just another day at the office. As the Colosseum's shadow stretches across Rome, it's time to dive into the heart of the beast, the arena itself. You think your morning was tough? Wait until you see the organized chaos behind these spectacles. It's like a Black Friday sale, but with more blood and fewer discounts. First, let's talk logistics because, believe it or not, getting 50,000 Romans into one place requires more than just opening the gates and shouting, "Free bread." The Colosseum, or Flavian Amphitheater, for those who love a good Latin twist, is an architectural marvel, holding an audience larger than the average modern sports stadium. Constructed between 70–80 AD, this was the brainchild of Emperor Vespasian and his son Titus, who decided the people needed a distraction from the small matter of a recent civil war. They didn't just want to build an amphitheater, they wanted to make a statement. The good citizens of Rome didn't just stroll in and pick the first empty seat. Oh no, this was a meticulously orchestrated event. Tickets were free, which probably explains why the place was always packed. But here's the catch. Your seat depended entirely on your social standing. Senators and the elite enjoyed the premium seats closest to the action, because who doesn't want a front-row view of potential decapitation? Meanwhile, women and the poor were relegated to the nosebleeds, far enough to wonder if they were watching a gladiator or a particularly aggressive mime. Now, if you think the modern obsession with VIP areas and exclusive access is a recent phenomenon, think again. The Colosseum had its own version of a luxury box, the Imperial Box, prime real estate for the emperor and his pals. It's good to be the emperor, especially when you don't have to worry about anyone spilling their barley mush on your toga. The games themselves were the ultimate political tool. You see, every event was a chance for the emperor to strut his stuff, to win over the masses, or to distract them from the less glamorous aspects of Roman life, like rampant corruption or the occasional plague. The phrase bread and circuses wasn't just catchy. It was a blueprint for maintaining power. Provide enough of both, and you can bet the citizens won't notice, or care, that the empire's finances are shakier than a chariot on a cobblestone road. Speaking of finances, let's dive into the economic juggernaut that was the Roman games. Hosting a set of games could bankrupt a senator faster than you can say Gladius. But the potential political capital was worth the risk. The cost of a single event could reach up to several 100,000 sesterces, enough to fund a small army or buy a couple of luxury villas on the Italian coast. And where there's spectacle, there's betting. Ancient Romans loved a good wager almost as much as they loved their wine. Betting on gladiatorial fights was as common as chariot races, with odds as varied as the fighters themselves. A heavily favored gladiator might see odds similar to a modern heavyweight boxer, while a less experienced fighter's odds could be as hopeful as a lottery ticket. The crowd dynamics were a spectacle in their own right. The roar of 50,000 voices could probably be heard all the way to Gaul, and the atmosphere was part sporting event, part theater, and part primal scream therapy. People weren't just spectators. They were participants, shouting encouragement or hurling insults depending on their mood and the status of their bets. The mood could turn on a sestrius, and knowing how to play the crowd could mean the difference between life and death for a gladiator. The games served another purpose too, social control. The Romans had a knack for keeping the populace in check, and the games were a key part of the strategy. By offering the public a thrilling distraction, the powers that be could keep unrest at bay. If the masses were busy cheering or jeering, they weren't plotting rebellions or grumbling too loudly about grain shortages. But let's not forget the darker side of this entertainment. While the games are often romanticized as noble contests of skill and bravery, they were brutal affairs, with real blood and real death. For every crowd favorite who secured his freedom, there were countless others who met their end on the sand. The arena was less a stage for glory and more a battleground of survival, where the only thing separating a hero from a corpse was a twist of fate or the whim of the crowd. In all this, the gladiator is both a pawn and a performer, caught in a world where every action is scrutinized, every victory celebrated, and every defeat mourned or forgotten. And as the midday sun blazes overhead, the tension mounts. You prepare to step into the arena where the cheers and jeers of the crowd await, and the stakes are nothing short of life and death. But that, dear friend, is a tale for another day. The afternoon sun hasn't set yet, and the drama of the Colosseum is just getting started. As the midday sun blazes overhead, you gather at the entrance to the arena, feeling the weight of expectation and armor alike. Welcome to the main event, the Super Bowl of ancient Rome, minus the halftime show, but with a lot more suspense. You're not just fighting for survival, you're performing in the blood-soaked theater that is the Colosseum. Now, let's clear up a few misconceptions before you step out onto that sand. Hollywood's got a knack for turning gladiator fights into epic duels of honor and valor, but the reality was a bit more transactional. Gladiatorial combat was governed by a set of rules so strict they'd make a modern referee blush. Fights were typically overseen by a referee or summarudis, who had the final say in calling the shots, or rather, the stabs. The goal wasn't necessarily to kill your opponent. It was to put on a good show, which often meant prolonged battles with lots of dramatic flair. And who might you face in this deadly dance? Well, gladiators came in all shapes and sizes, just like the food court at a mall. Each fighter had a unique style, dictated by their armor and weaponry. You might be up against a murmillo, with their impressive helmets and shields, or a retiarius, wielding a net and trident, looking like they got lost on their way to a particularly aggressive fishing trip. Each type of gladiator had its strengths and vulnerabilities, making matches as much about strategy as brute strength. The survival odds. Let's just say you'd have better chances at a Vegas craps table. Estimates suggest about 10% of gladiators perished in each match, which, while grim, is better than the 50/50 odds Hollywood would have you believe. Remember, these fights were investments, and dead gladiators don't bring in repeat business. The Lannister wants you alive and kicking, preferably someone else's ribs. And what about that inevitable moment when you find yourself on the wrong end of a gladius? Well, here's where the thumb comes in. The infamous thumbs up or thumbs down decision is another Hollywood myth that's been stretched more than a Roman toga. In reality, the signal for mercy or death was more likely a sideways thumb gesture, known as parlis verso. The decision rested with the editor, often the emperor himself, who had the final say on whether you lived to fight another day or became part of the arena's ever-growing list of casualties. Assuming you survive, and let's hope you do, you're not just patched up with a pat on the back. Gladiators had access to some of the best medical care available, which makes sense when you consider the economic investment riding on your shoulders. Ancient Rome boasted skilled medici, or doctors, who specialized in stitching up the kind of wounds you'd usually only see in a horror movie. They used techniques that would make a modern ER doctor raise an eyebrow, like honey to prevent infection and vinegar to disinfect wounds. It was rudimentary but effective, and it kept you in fighting form. But let's take a moment to ponder the psychological toll of living under the constant threat of death. The mental gymnastics of a gladiator's life are akin to walking a tightrope over a pit of lions. Every match could be your last, and yet there's an allure to the life, a strange, intoxicating mix of fame, fear, and the flicker of freedom. It's no wonder some gladiators became legends, their names echoing through history like the roar of the Colosseum itself. While some parts of society viewed gladiators as the ancient equivalent of rock stars, others saw them as little more than slaves with a flair for the dramatic. You're a hero when you win, and a forgotten footnote when you lose. The psychological resilience required to navigate this world could rival that of any modern-day celebrity, but with significantly higher stakes. In the grand tapestry of Roman culture, gladiators were both revered and reviled, seen as embodying the virtues of courage and strength, while simultaneously serving as reminders of Rome's brutal and bloody underbelly. They were part of the social spectacle, a living paradox that reflected the empire's complexity and contradictions. So, as you step out into the arena, feel the sand beneath your feet, and hear the crowd's deafening roar, remember that you're not just a participant in a savage game. You're a symbol, a living legend in the making, a testament to the strange, violent beauty of Roman life. The stakes are high, the tension palpable, and the outcome uncertain. But that, my friend, is the essence of the gladiatorial life, a dance with death where every step matters, and every moment counts. The afternoon might be just beginning, but the drama of the arena is already in full swing. As the dust settles in the Colosseum and the crowd's roar fades into the distance, you might think the excitement ends there. But oh no, dear friend, the real drama unfolds behind the scenes once the gladiatorial games wrap up for the day. Whether you've emerged victorious or been dragged off on a stretcher, the aftermath of the games is where the true stakes reveal themselves. If you're one of the lucky, or skilled, few to have survived yet another round in the arena, congratulations are in order. But before you pop the ancient equivalent of a champagne cork, let's delve into what victory actually means in this brutal world. For one, you'll likely receive a monetary reward. Not a king's ransom, mind you, but enough to make your life a bit more bearable. A successful gladiator could earn upwards of 3,000 sesterces per victory, which is nothing to scoff at. A tidy sum when you consider that a Roman soldier earned about 900 sesterces annually. It's the kind of wage boost that might make you reconsider a career change to soldiering, at least until you remember the whole risk of imminent death thing. But let's also address the elephant, or should I say, lion in the room, the promise of eventual freedom. Win enough fights, and you might just earn the coveted rudies, that wooden sword symbolizing liberation. It's a dangling carrot that keeps gladiators swinging and the crowds cheering. However, like most things in life, it's far more elusive than it seems. For every gladiator who earned their freedom, countless others met their end with little more than a fleeting moment of glory. The rudis is as much a part of the mythos as the gladiator's helmet, a shiny symbol of hope draped in a cloak of near-impassable odds. Now, if fortune didn't favor you and you found yourself on the losing end, the outlook becomes a bit bleaker. Depending on the whims of the editor and the crowd's verdict, you might be spared, but that doesn't mean you're off the hook. Healing awaits, if you're lucky, with those rudimentary yet surprisingly effective Roman medical practices. However, should your injuries prove too severe, the grim reality is that you're likely to be discarded like a broken amphora. It's the harsh truth of the arena. Glory is fleeting, and the sands are unforgiving. The games aren't merely about life and death, though they're a microcosm of Roman society itself, a reflection of its values, its politics, and its economy. The spectacle serves as a reminder that while the empire stands tall and mighty, its foundations are built on the backs and blood of those it subjugates. Gladiators, in their strange duality as both slaves and celebrities, embody the paradox of a society that thrives on both civilization and savagery. As the evening falls, the legacy of the gladiatorial games continues to echo through the corridors of history. Their impact on Roman culture was profound, shaping public entertainment and influencing political strategies. The games served as a tool of propaganda, reinforcing the idea of Roman superiority and offering a controlled outlet for the public's emotions. They were the ultimate distraction, a way to keep societal unrest at bay and the populace placated with bread and circuses. But what about today? The shadow of the gladiators looms large even in modern times. Their legend has seeped into our collective consciousness, inspiring countless films, books, and TV shows. We romanticize their valor, their defiance in the face of death, and their quest for glory, all the while glossing over the harsh realities they endured. It's the ultimate case of historical rose-colored glasses, seeing the glory while conveniently ignoring the gore. It's interesting to note how the concept of gladiatorial combat has morphed over the centuries, evolving from a brutal form of entertainment into a metaphor for resilience and strength. The term gladiator has transcended its original context, becoming a symbol of fighting spirit and indomitable will. Yet, let's not forget the sobering truth that for the real gladiators, their lives were often nasty, brutish, and short, a far cry from the glorified image we so love to celebrate. In wrapping up this exploration of gladiatorial life, it's crucial to acknowledge both the legend and the reality. The allure of the arena, with its tales of heroism and spectacle, continues to captivate us. But behind the glamour lies a story of exploitation, survival, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. The enduring legacy of the gladiators is a testament to the complex tapestry of human nature, our fascination with violence, our longing for heroes, and our perennial quest for meaning amidst chaos. So, as you let the day's lessons sink in, remember that the gladiators of ancient Rome were more than just entertainers. They were a reflection of the society that created them, an embodiment of its strengths and its flaws. They remind us that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a living narrative that continues to shape who we are today. As the sun sets on the Colosseum and the ghosts of the past retreat into the shadows, we're left to ponder the stories we tell and the truths we choose to remember. And in the grand arena of life, perhaps that's the most valuable lesson of all. As the sun barely peeks over the frosty fjords, you, a Viking shipbuilder, find yourself elbow-deep in the rich, earthy smells of fresh-cut oak. This isn't just any oak, mind you. This is the heart of your village's future, the backbone of your community's ambition. You're in the year 900 AD, smack dab in the middle of a bustling Norse village. Picture the scene. Smoke rising from thatched roofs, chickens clucking like they've got something important to say, and the sharp ring of a hammer on metal cutting through the crisp morning air. Today, you're not just building a ship. You're crafting a legend that could sail across the pages of history, if only those pages existed yet. So why shipbuilding, you ask? The Vikings weren't just the horned helmet-wearing pillagers of legend. And by the way, those helmets, total myth. But back to the ships. These vessels were the heart and soul of Viking society. They were the keys to exploration, power, and economic survival. It was like crafting a spacecraft for interstellar travel, without the zero gravity and sci-fi suits. The Norse were master seafarers, and their ships were their golden tickets to trade, conquest, and yes, the occasional raid. Now, if you think it's all about brute force and brawn, think again. Shipbuilding in the Viking Age was an art form, a symphony of wood and iron, requiring precise craftsmanship and an intimate understanding of the natural world. The oak tree you're working on today, it's been chosen with more care than an Instagram influencer picking a filter. You need something sturdy, something that can withstand the North Sea's notorious mood swings. And we're talking about a 25-meter-long dragon ship here, not a dinghy for a lazy Sunday paddle. But let's not romanticize this too much. Shipbuilding was no mere hobby. It was a community effort that involved everyone from the blacksmith to the village chief. Resources were pooled, and each ship represented a significant investment. You see, a fully outfitted longship could cost as much as 50 cows, a small fortune back then. It was a gamble, but one that could pay off big time if you hit the jackpot with new trade routes or a successful raid. The day kicks off with a meeting of the minds, your fellow craftsmen and the village leaders, gathered around the ship's skeletal frame. There's no PowerPoint presentation here, just a lot of gesturing and nodding. You're discussing the keel, the ship's spine, so to speak. It's got to be straight, strong, and as flawless as Thor's hammer. You can't afford a wonky keel. That would be like trying to drive a car with a flat tire. And here's a nugget for you. Vikings had a clever method for ensuring their ships were seaworthy. They'd build them upside down. Yes, you heard that right. The hull was constructed first, then flipped over like a pancake, ready for the finishing touches. This technique allowed them to create those sleek, shallow draft designs that could navigate both open seas and shallow rivers with ease. The morning wears on, and you find yourself knee-deep in shavings, the smell of sawdust mingling with the salty sea breeze. You can hear children playing nearby, their laughter echoing like the distant call of a gull. It's a reminder that this isn't just work, it's a legacy. The ships you build will carry these children and their children into a future filled with possibilities. But let's not sail too far into the romantic sunset just yet. Shipbuilding was back-breaking labor, a test of endurance and skill. You're using tools that have been passed down through generations, each with its own history and quirks. The adze you're wielding has seen more action than a Viking saga. It's carved countless planks for countless ships, each one a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of your people. As you take a break, wiping the sweat from your brow, you glance around at your fellow builders, each one absorbed in their task. There's Sven, the village self-proclaimed expert on everything, and Bjorn, who claims he once saw a sea serpent. You can't help but chuckle at their antics, a reminder that even in the serious business of shipbuilding, there's room for a bit of levity. So why does all this matter? Shipbuilding was the lifeline of Viking society, the engine of their economy, and the anchor of their political power. Without these ships, the Norse would have been just another isolated people on the fringes of Europe. Instead, they became legends, their influence stretching from the icy shores of Greenland to the bustling markets of Byzantium. As the morning fades into afternoon, you feel the weight of history on your shoulders. You're not just building a ship, you're crafting a vessel that will carry your people into a new era, a testament to their courage, resilience, and ambition. It's a reminder that even in a world without smartphones or social media, the Norse knew how to make an impact, a splash, if you will, across the world's waters. And that, my friend, is where your day begins. With sawdust in your hair, the sound of hammers in your ears, and the promise of adventure on the horizon. Welcome to the life of a Viking shipbuilder, where every plank tells a story, and every ship is a leap into the unknown. As you roll up your sleeves, ready to dive back into the world of Viking shipbuilding, let's get into the nitty-gritty tools of the trade. You might think the Vikings were just swinging axes around like lumberjack wannabes, but oh, how wrong you'd be. Sure, the axe was the staple, the bread and butter of the Viking toolkit, but they weren't just hacking away willy-nilly. This was precision work, folks. The double-beveled axe was the rock star of the operation, used to fell trees and shape timber with the finesse of a master sculptor. You needed strength and skill to wield it, but more importantly, you needed an eye for detail. After all, each stroke could mean the difference between a sturdy hull and a leaky disaster. But let's not forget the unsung heroes of the tool chest. Enter the saws and planes, less flashy perhaps, but indispensable. Viking saws were a bit like the Swiss Army knives of their day, versatile and essential for cutting planks to size. They were typically one-man saws, which meant you needed steady hands and a good sense of rhythm. Think of it as the original solo jam session. Then there were the planes, used for smoothing out wood surfaces. These babies made sure the ship's skin was as sleek as a well-groomed udder, reducing resistance in the water. It's not just about looking good, folks, about sailing smoothly and swiftly across those choppy northern seas. Now, let's pause for some real talk. We've all seen those images of burly Vikings sporting horned helmets, looking like they just stepped out of a heavy metal album cover. Spoiler alert, it's pure fiction. Picture this. You're hammering away, deep in concentration, and you've got these cumbersome horns sticking out, ready to snag on every passing branch or rope. Not exactly OSHA-approved headgear, right? The truth is, the horned helmet is a 19th century concoction, more opera costume than historical fact. So, let's put that myth to bed and focus on the real story, the Vikings' engineering prowess. Speaking of engineering, these folks were miles ahead of their time. Take clinker-built construction, for example. That's where overlapping planks are riveted together, creating a flexible yet strong hull. It's like the medieval version of carbon fiber, light yet incredibly durable. The Vikings mastered this technique, allowing their ships to flex and adapt to the sea's moods without cracking like a cheap vase. And let's not forget the keel, that all-important spine of the ship. Shaped from a single piece of wood, often oak, it had to be as straight and true as an arrow. A warped keel would mean disaster, much like trying to win a race with a three-legged horse. So, why all this fuss over shipbuilding? Because these vessels were the lifeblood of Viking society. They weren't just for raiding and pillaging, although, let's be honest, that was a popular pastime. Ships were crucial for trade, exploration, and communication. They connected the far-flung corners of the Viking world, from the icy shores of Greenland to the bustling bazaars of Constantinople. A well-built ship was a ticket to wealth and glory, a symbol of power and prestige. It was a statement to the world that the Vikings were a force to be reckoned with, not just a bunch of rowdy barbarians. As you work, the sound of blades against wood fills the air, a symphony of industry that echoes through the village. You can almost feel the presence of your ancestors, each generation passing down their hard-earned knowledge. It's a reminder that shipbuilding is not just a job, it's a legacy. The tools you use have been honed over centuries, each one a testament to the ingenuity and perseverance of your people. And while the modern world might see you as a relic of the past, you know that these skills are timeless, as relevant today as they were 1,000 years ago. So, as the sun begins its slow descent and the shadows lengthen across the shipyard, take a moment to reflect on the journey so far. From raw timber to finely crafted vessel, you're part of a tradition that has shaped history. The tools you wield, the techniques you employ, and the ships you build are all part of a grand adventure, a story that continues to unfold with each stroke of the axe and sweep of the saw. And as you wipe the sweat from your brow and gaze out at the horizon, you can't help but feel a sense of pride. Because in a world without blueprints and CAD software, the Vikings were building marvels of engineering that would stand the test of time, a testament to their courage, skill, and relentless spirit. As you stand there, basking in the afterglow of a morning well spent, the economic gears of the Viking age start clicking into place. You see, building a ship wasn't just about showing off your superior carpentry skills or flexing your biceps for the village. It was a financial juggernaut, a full-on investment akin to launching a startup today, minus the venture capitalists and fancy beanbag chairs. First, let's talk about the cold, hard cash, or rather, the equivalent in livestock and silver. Constructing a longship wasn't just a casual weekend project. It could set you back around 30 to 50 cows, depending on the size and complexity of the vessel. Why cows, you ask? Because in Viking society, cows were currency, symbols of wealth and prosperity. If you had a herd, you were essentially the Elon Musk of your fjord. So when a chieftain commissioned a ship, it was a statement, a declaration of status that screamed, not just your average sheep farmer. But where did all that value go? It's not like the shipbuilders were pocketing the equivalent of a Tesla in silver. No, my friend, those resources were spread across a mini-economy. You needed high-quality timber, which meant securing the best oak forests, often a politically charged endeavor. Then there were the iron nails, up to 200 kilos of them for a single ship. Iron was the Viking equivalent of gold, and it didn't come cheap. Smelting iron required a small army of workers and a hefty supply of barg ore, charcoal, and sweat equity. And don't even get me started on the labor costs. A team of skilled craftsmen could take several months to finish a ship. These weren't just any workers. They were artisans, the rock stars of their day, who knew how to wield an adze like a sorcerer with a wand. Their expertise didn't come from YouTube tutorials, but from generations of hands-on experience. Now, let's delve into the trade networks these ships enabled, because the Vikings weren't just in it for the plunder. They were savvy traders, the original globetrotters, connecting Scandinavia to the world long before airline miles and hotel points were a thing. Their ships sailed as far as Byzantium and Baghdad, opening up trade routes that would make Marco Polo green with envy. Picture this: a Viking chieftain's ship gliding down the Volga River, laden with furs, amber, and walrus ivory, ready to be swapped for silk, spices, and silver. These weren't just random knickknacks. They were the high-demand products that fueled the Viking economy. The bustling marketplaces of Constantinople and the glittering cities of the Islamic caliphates became regular stops for these intrepid Norse merchants. Forget Amazon Prime. This was the original global supply chain, and it was powered by the sweat and skill of Viking shipbuilders. And let's not ignore the social dynamics at play. Owning a ship meant you weren't just a player in the local scene, you were a mover and shaker on the international stage. Viking chieftains used their fleets not just for raiding, but as a means of forging alliances and securing political power. Picture it like a medieval LinkedIn, where your ship was your profile, and the cargo it carried was your resume. As you take in all this, the sound of hammers and saws continues around you, each strike a reminder of the economic engine you're fueling. The village buzzes with activity, a hive of industry and ambition. Children scamper around, wide-eyed at the spectacle of shipbuilding, dreaming of the day they might sail to distant lands, or, at the very least, brag about their dad's latest seafaring adventure. But let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. The Viking Age was no idyllic time of endless adventure. It was a period of intense competition, where the stakes were as high as the risks. A poorly built ship could mean the difference between returning home laden with riches or not returning at all. The sea was as unforgiving as a tax auditor on a caffeine rush, and only the best-built vessels could withstand its wrath. So, as midday sun glints off the water and the air is thick with the scent of salt and sawdust, you realize that you're not just building a ship. You're building a future, a bridge to new worlds and new opportunities. The Vikings may not have had GPS or weather apps, but they had something far more valuable: the courage to venture into the unknown and the skill to make it back to tell the tale. And as you break for a well-deserved lunch, knowing full well that this ship might one day sail to the farthest reaches of the known world, you can't help but feel a swell of pride. Because in an age where your reputation was everything, a well-crafted ship was your calling card, your ticket to the big leagues. Viking shipbuilders weren't just craftsmen. They were the architects of an era, shaping the course of history with every plank and nail. Now, as you sit there munching on a hearty meal, likely a stew of some sort, because let's face it, Vikings were nothing if not practical, you ponder the economic realities that have shaped your world. These ships were more than just tools of trade and warfare. They were symbols of a society that valued innovation, resilience, and the sheer audacity to dream big. So, as you prepare to dive back into the afternoon's work, remember this: you're not just part of a tradition, you're part of a revolution. A revolution that connected disparate cultures, exchanged ideas and goods, and laid the groundwork for the interconnected world we live in today. In a world where the only constant was change, the Vikings knew how to ride the waves, both literal and metaphorical. And as you pick up your tools once more, ready to tackle the challenges of the day, you carry with you the spirit of adventure and enterprise that defined an age. And just like that, your afternoon kicks off with a Viking-style bang, as the clamor of the shipyard reaches a fever pitch. It's not just about building a ship anymore. It's about crafting a symbol of might and prestige. You see, in the Viking Age, a longship was more than a floating piece of wood. It was a declaration of power, a mobile fortress that announced to the world, here comes someone you don't want to mess with. First off, let's talk about the big cheese in this operation, the Jarl. Picture the Jarl as the CEO of Viking enterprises, only with more furs and fewer spreadsheets. This isn't just any leader. This is the man who makes the big calls, like where to raid next or which alliance to forge. His word is law, and his decisions ripple through the community like a stone skipping across a fjord. If the Jarl says, "We need a new ship," you better believe the hammers start swinging. These longships were the Swiss army knives of the medieval world. They could raid, trade, and transport with equal efficiency. They were the seafaring equivalent of a sports car, a cargo ship, and a tank all rolled into one. The Jarl understood this. He knew that a fleet wasn't just about the potential plunder, it was about influence and control. In a world where travel blogs were non-existent, a longship was your best advertisement. It was a bold statement that shouted, "We've arrived, and we mean business." Now, don't think for a second that this was a solo gig for the Jarl. Oh no, this was a community affair, a glorious ensemble where everyone played their part. Shipbuilding was the Viking version of a barn raising, only with more sea monsters and fewer cows. The entire village had a stake in this endeavor. Men swung axes and wielded saws, women prepared food and managed logistics, and even the kids got in on the action, fetching tools or just running about underfoot, future shipbuilders in training. And let's not forget the role of the craftsman, a revered figure in Viking society. These artisans were the unsung heroes, the ones who turned the Jarl's dreams into seaworthy reality. Their expertise was the magic potion that transformed raw timber into a sleek, deadly predator of the seas. They were the engineers of their day, operating without blueprints or manuals, just pure skill and instinct honed through countless seasons. But let's get real for a moment. This wasn't just some idyllic community project with everyone holding hands and singing sea shanties. The hierarchy here was as firm as a well-driven nail. The Jarl called the shots, but he needed the support of his warriors, the Bandi, free farmers, and even the thralls, slaves, who did the grunt work. It was a system that ensured everyone knew their place, a delicate balance of power where each person played their part to keep the Viking economy afloat, and sometimes quite literally. And speaking of power, let's talk raids. Viking raids were the stuff of nightmares for the unprepared monasteries and coastal villages of Europe. These weren't random acts of violence. They were strategic maneuvers aimed at wealth acquisition and territorial expansion. The longship was the ultimate raiding machine, capable of sneaking up rivers like a silent predator. With a shallow draft and light build, it could beach anywhere, unload a horde of warriors, and be back out to sea before the locals even knew what hit them. A single raid could yield enough silver, slaves, and valuables to fund a small kingdom, or at least keep the Jarl in mead and fancy threads for a while. And let's be honest, for the Viking warriors, it was also about the glory, the stories they'd tell around the hearth, the sagas that would immortalize their names. The longship was their stage, and Europe was the audience, though perhaps not the willing kind. But don't mistake this for mindless pillaging. These raids were meticulously planned military operations, with the shipbuilders playing as much a part in the strategy as the warriors themselves. A poorly built ship meant disaster, and no one wanted to be the guy responsible for that. The Jarl's reputation, and by extension, the entire village's prosperity, hinged on the craftsmanship of these vessels. It was a high-stakes game, with the spoils of war and reputation on the line. As the afternoon sun casts long shadows over the bustling shipyard, you can sense the anticipation in the air. A new ship means fresh opportunities, new horizons to conquer. The rhythmic hum of saws and hammers is a symphony of ambition, a testament to the spirit that fueled the Viking age. Each plank, each nail, is an investment in the future, a promise of adventures yet to come. And yet, for all the romantic notions of Viking life, it's worth remembering the harsh realities. The sea was as much a foe as any enemy warrior, and not every voyage ended in triumph. Storms could capsize even the sturdiest ships, and distant lands held dangers as varied as their treasures. The same longship that carried warriors to glory could just as easily become their watery grave. In this microcosm of Viking society, the shipyard reflects the delicate dance of ambition and risk, power and community. It is a place where dreams are crafted and destinies forged, where the clang of iron on wood echoes the heartbeat of an era defined by exploration and conquest. As the day draws on and the ship's frame takes shape under your skilled hands, you realize that this is more than just a job. It's a calling, a connection to your past, and a bridge to the future. You are part of a legacy, a lineage of craftsmen and adventurers who dared to dream beyond the horizon. So, as the sun begins its descent, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, you stand back to admire your handiwork. The shipyard hums with life, a testament to the indomitable spirit of the Vikings. And in this moment, as the shadows lengthen and the air cools, you feel the weight of history and the promise of the unknown, calling you to sail once more into the vast, uncharted seas of the future. But that's a tale for another day. For now, your work is done, and the promise of tomorrow beckons with the allure of new adventures yet to be written. As the evening chill creeps in, you pause to contemplate the legacy of what you've just helped create. Viking shipbuilding was no mere tale of daring expeditions and fierce raids, though it undoubtedly had its share of high-stakes adventure. It was an engineering marvel, a testament to Norse ingenuity and grit. Here's where we get real. While the image of a Viking warrior storming a monastery with a battle cry might capture the imagination, it's the quiet genius of the shipbuilders that truly propelled Viking society into the annals of history. The longships, those sleek, dragon-headed vessels, were the brainchild of practical necessity and innovative design. They featured a unique clinker-built construction, where overlapping planks made the hull both light and sturdy. This wasn't just about making a splash in the literal sense. It was about creating a vessel that could handle the North Sea's notorious temper tantrums. In essence, Vikings were building the sports cars of their day, fast, nimble, and undeniably stylish. So why does this matter? Because these ships were the backbone of a culture that thrived on exploration and trade as much as on conquest. While the image of pillaging Vikings might have sold a lot of cinema tickets, it's their role as master traders and explorers that left a more enduring imprint. Their voyages stretched from the icy coasts of Newfoundland. Yes, Vikings beat Columbus by about 500 years to the opulent markets of the Middle East. This wasn't just about acquiring loot. It was about knitting together a network of trade that spanned continents. The Viking Age was as much about commerce as it was about conquest, and those ships were the linchpin. But let's dive into the myths for a moment. The horned helmets, the bloodthirsty marauder stereotype, the idea that they were just out for plunder. It's a romanticized view, a Hollywood script if ever there was one. In reality, Vikings were multifaceted, as likely to be found haggling over walrus tusks in a bustling marketplace as they were drawing swords on the high seas. They were adept at navigating the socio-political landscapes of their time, forging alliances as much as they fought battles. Sure, they had their rowdy moments, who doesn't after a bit too much mead? But they were also shrewd diplomats and traders. Their shipbuilding techniques, honed over centuries, were passed down through generations like treasured heirlooms. And let's not forget the economic implications. A longship wasn't just a tool of war. It was a massive investment, a communal endeavor that could make or break fortunes. Imagine pooling resources worth up to 50 cows. That's a herd that would make any medieval farmer weep with envy, just to launch one of these beauties. It was a high-risk, high-reward gamble, where the stakes were potentially life-altering. In terms of cultural legacy, Viking ships have seeped into the modern world in ways that might surprise you. Their clinker-building technique, for instance, influenced ship design well into the medieval period and beyond. Ever heard of a Gnar? It was the Viking cargo ship, designed for carrying goods rather than warriors. Its design principles were adapted and evolved through the ages, laying the groundwork for the ships that would eventually connect the world during the age of exploration. And then there's the splash they made in popular culture. Who can resist the pull of a good Viking saga, with its larger-than-life heroes and epic journeys? From Wagnerian operas to modern TV shows, the Viking Age continues to captivate our collective imagination. Sure, the horned helmet might be more costume drama than historical fact, but it's a testament to the enduring allure of the Norsemen's legacy. It's the blend of myth and reality that keeps us hooked, like a cliffhanger ending that never quite resolves. So, as you stand there, surveying the skeletal frame of the ship you've labored over, consider the duality of the Viking story. Myth and reality, romance and harsh truth. It's a narrative shaped by the ceaseless rhythm of the sea and the relentless drive of a people who charted their course by the stars and the strength of their own hands. This was not just about raiding and trading. It was about creating connections across vast oceans, leaving an indelible mark on the tapestry of history. The clang of hammers begins to fade, replaced by the chatter of a community winding down from a day's hard work. As the shipyard empties and the stars begin to twinkle overhead, you realize that Viking shipbuilding was about much more than wood and nails. It was about human endeavor, the pursuit of greatness in a world that held no guarantees, only the promise of what lay beyond the horizon. It was about harnessing the power of imagination and innovation to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. In a world that often romanticizes the past, it's easy to forget the sheer effort and ingenuity that went into making history. But there, in the shadow of the ship you've helped to build, it becomes clear. The Vikings' true legacy isn't just their sagas of adventure and conquest. It's the spirit of innovation and exploration, the courage to venture into the unknown, and the skill to return home with stories and treasures to share. It's a legacy that continues to inspire, challenging us to look beyond the legends and see the people who shaped them. So, as you turn away from the shipyard, ready to rest before another day of crafting history, take with you the knowledge that you're part of a tradition that did more than conquer lands. It conquered the boundaries of what was possible. The Vikings weren't just warriors. They were pioneers, navigators, and visionaries. And as long as we remember that, their legacy will continue to sail across the oceans of time. You're a villager in medieval Europe, and today kicks off with the kind of energy only a good plague can inspire. The morning sun peeks over your thatched roof, promising another day of survival amid the chaos of the Black Death. This isn't your ordinary medieval Monday. You're about to witness the bubonic plague, that unwelcome guest crashing on Europe's couch, spreading its deadly reach like a medieval influencer. Only, with more death and fewer selfies. It's the mid-14th century, and the plague has rolled in like a bad storm. Originating from the steppes of Central Asia, this pestilence has hitched a ride on the Silk Road, making it the most infamous traveler of its time. By the way, let's give a shout-out to our uninvited co-stars, flea-ridden rats. These rodents have quite the travel itinerary, hopping onto merchant ships like they're booking an all-inclusive cruise to Europe. The rats, the fleas, and the microscopic bacteria Yersinia pestis, they're a real dream team when it comes to medieval mayhem. Now, let's talk numbers. By the time you finish your breakfast of stale bread and watered-down ale, the plague has already claimed millions of lives across continents. Historians estimate that between 75 and 200 million people perished, with Europe losing about one-third of its population. That's like erasing everyone from modern-day Germany and then some. It's a grim statistic, but it's your new reality, and the numbers are hard to ignore when they're knocking on your village door. Trade routes, those bustling highways of commerce and culture, have transformed into the vectors of this deadly disease. Ships carrying everything from spices to silk are now unwitting vessels of doom, spreading the plague with every port they dock at. Venice, a city built on trade, becomes one of the first European hotspots. The Venetian authorities, in a rare display of efficiency, try to enforce quarantines, derived from the Italian word quaranta, meaning 40, as in the number of days ships had to wait offshore. But let's be honest, medieval logistics weren't exactly airtight. So, what's your village doing to fend off this microscopic invader? Well, let's dive into the medieval mindset, a world where medical theories are as colorful as the stained glass in your local church. The dominant idea, miasma theory, the belief that bad air, literally miasma, causes disease. It's not entirely off the mark. After all, living in crammed, unsanitary quarters isn't doing anyone's immune system any favors. Your local healer, probably the closest thing to a doctor, might prescribe a variety of cures that are more likely to make you chuckle than to heal you. Take, for instance, the practice of bloodletting. The logic is simple. If you're sick, clearly you have bad blood. So let's just let it out. Or perhaps you'll be advised to carry around a posy of herbs or flowers to ward off the evil smells. People even resort to strapping live chickens to their bodies, a paltry solution to a monumental problem. While you're busy grappling with these medieval remedies, the social fabric around you is unraveling. Fear and suspicion spread faster than the plague itself. Neighbors eye each other with distrust, and families turn inward. Some folks flee to the countryside, hoping that isolation equals immunity. Others believe divine wrath is the culprit, leading to fervent religious processions and acts of penance. After all, when science fails, turning to the heavens seems like a solid plan B. Amid this turmoil, there's a certain dark humor in the absurdity of it all. You can't help but snicker at the sheer audacity of some cures, or the irony of the plagues spread along the very routes that once connected the world in trade and culture. Yet, there's a sobering reality in the air, one that reminds you that the Black Death isn't just a historical footnote. It's a profound, transformative force reshaping your world. As the day wears on, the village buzzes with whispered tales of distant cities like Florence and Paris succumbing to the plague, of streets filled with carts of the dead, and of the rising price of bread and grain as fear grips the land. Economic instability is the unwelcome sidekick to the health crisis, with inflation and scarcity making daily survival even more precarious. While you ponder the day's events, remember that this is just the beginning. The Black Death isn't just a moment in time. It's a catalyst for change, altering the course of history in ways you can't yet fathom. But for now, as the sun sets over your village, casting long shadows across the cobblestones, you brace yourself for the night, hoping that tomorrow brings a glimmer of hope, or at the very least, fewer fleas. As the shadows lengthen over cobblestones and the sun retreats behind the hills, the village settles into a restless twilight. But there's no respite from the chaos of the Black Death. It's a 24/7 affair, like the world's worst pop-up event. You're left pondering the next day's survival, hoping perhaps for a miracle, or maybe just a decent meal that won't empty your pockets. Because let's be real, the economic landscape is as bleak as a medieval winter. With the plague decimating the population faster than the latest TikTok trend, you'd think there'd be more food to go around. Right. Wrong. The laws of supply and demand are having a field day, and grain prices are skyrocketing like they're auditioning for the medieval version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. With fewer hands to work the fields, agricultural productivity has plummeted. Those who survive are left scrambling for what little grain is available, all while paying a premium for their daily bread. It's like trying to buy a concert ticket to a sold-out show, but instead of music, you get moldy rye. Now, if you manage to hang onto your job in this mess, congratulations. You've just become a hot commodity. Laborers are dropping like flies, and those left standing suddenly find themselves with a bargaining chip. The feudal lords, those once untouchable titans of the medieval world, now have to do something they're not accustomed to: negotiate. Talk about a role reversal. With so many serfs kicking the bucket, the survivors can demand better wages and even, gasp, improved working conditions. It's the Middle Ages, but it's starting to sound a bit like a labor union meeting. This shifting power dynamic is one of the unsung consequences of the plague, a tidal wave of change crashing into the rigid structures of feudal society. You see, when serfs and peasants start realizing their own value, they become a bit less inclined to bow and scrape before their lords. Some even pack up and leave, seeking better prospects elsewhere. It's a mass migration of the desperate and the hopeful, people chasing a new kind of freedom on the heels of devastation. The decline of serfdom is underway, and it's about as subtle as a jousting tournament. But let's not get too romantic about this newfound power. For every step forward, there's a stumble backward. With death lurking in every shadow, superstition and scapegoating become the medieval version of stress relief. When science and reason pack up and skip town, you're left with a grab bag of bizarre beliefs and frantic finger-pointing. Maybe it's the Jews, they say, or perhaps witches are casting hexes from the shadows. It's a witch hunt, literally and metaphorically, as communities search for someone, anyone, to blame for their suffering. And speaking of blame, the church is having a bit of a PR crisis. With the plague wiping out clergy members left and right, the ecclesiastical hierarchy is in tatters. Faithful are looking to the church for answers, but all they're getting is a collective shrug. It's a theological conundrum. How does an omnipotent deity allow such suffering? The church, once the unshakable bedrock of medieval life, is now scrambling to maintain its grip on power and authority. Yet, amid the chaos and confusion, there's a certain dark irony to be found. The Black Death, in all its horror, is acting as a great equalizer, knocking down the walls of class and status. It doesn't care whether you're a king or a commoner. It's an equal opportunity destroyer. Towns and villages are left to rebuild, to reimagine what their societies might look like in the aftermath. It's a grim kind of rebirth, but a rebirth nonetheless. So, as you lie awake in your straw bed, listening to the distant howl of the wind, you wonder, what will the world look like when the dust settles? The plague is a force of nature, an unstoppable juggernaut reshaping history in real time. And you, dear villager, are living through it, witnessing firsthand the upheaval of an era. Tomorrow, the sun will rise again, and with it, a sliver of hope, or at least a chance to haggle over the price of grain. As the sun peeks over the urban landscape, casting its tentative glow on stone buildings and cobbled streets, you might think the plague would at least pause for a lunch break. But no, it's relentless, and in cities, the situation is more chaotic than a medieval market on discount day. Urban centers, those buzzing hives of activity and trade, are now the epicenters of despair, grappling with a logistical nightmare of epic proportions, dealing with mass mortality. It's like trying to tidy up after a festival, only instead of litter, you've got an overwhelming number of deceased citizens and no clear plan. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Burial practices. With bodies piling up faster than your neighbor's complaints about taxes, cities are forced to innovate, or at least improvise. Enter the plague pits, the medieval solution to a very morbid problem. Imagine this. Vast communal graves, often hastily dug outside city walls or in already existing cemeteries, designed to accommodate the overwhelming number of casualties. We're talking about pits so large, they could swallow entire neighborhoods. London, for instance, had several, with the infamous East Smithfield pit being one of the largest, holding thousands of bodies. It's the kind of grim efficiency that makes you appreciate modern sanitation. But here's the kicker. Despite the mass burials, people still try to maintain some semblance of dignity and tradition. Funerary rites, deeply ingrained in medieval culture, weren't easily abandoned. The dead were often wrapped in linen shrouds, and if you were lucky, or important, perhaps you get a quick blessing before being consigned to the pit. Still, in many cases, the sheer volume of death meant expediency trumped ceremony. It was a somber reminder that in the face of such overwhelming despair, even the most sacred traditions could be upended. Now, while the men are busy digging pits and carting bodies, it's the women who are stepping up in surprising ways. With so many men succumbing to the plague, women find themselves thrust into roles they never anticipated, and society never expected. They're managing households, stepping into trades, and even taking on roles in local governance. It's a seismic shift in gender dynamics, driven by necessity rather than ideology. In places like Italy, women are seen running family businesses and even participating in the burgeoning banking sector. Sure, it's not exactly a feminist utopia. After all, this is the 14th century, but it's a glimmer of autonomy in an otherwise oppressive era. And let's not forget the impact on art and culture. With death lurking at every corner, it's no surprise that an obsession with the macabre seeps into every facet of life. Artists and writers, grappling with their own mortality, start to explore themes of death and the afterlife with an intensity that makes your average horror movie look like a children's bedtime story. The dance macabre, or dance of death, becomes a popular motif, a stark reminder of life's fleeting nature. It's an era where skulls and skeletons grace the pages of manuscripts and the walls of churches, a visual shorthand for society's collective anxiety. Yet, amid this grim fascination with death, there's also a burgeoning appreciation for life's fleeting beauty. The ars moriendi, or the art of dying, becomes a philosophical touchstone, encouraging people to live well and die better. It's a strangely comforting notion, suggesting that even in the face of inevitable doom, there's value in how you meet your end. This cultural shift is as much about coping with the omnipresent specter of the plague as it is about finding meaning in an uncertain world. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality is stark. Cities are suffocating under the weight of their own death tolls, and the living are left to navigate a world transformed by loss. Trade suffers as ports become ghost towns, choked by quarantine and fear. The once bustling marketplaces are now eerily quiet, their vibrant colors and sounds replaced by the silence of shuttered stalls. The economic impact is profound, with cities like Venice and Genoa struggling to maintain their commercial dominance. It's a stark reminder that the Black Death isn't just a health crisis, it's an economic cataclysm. As the day wears on, you can't help but marvel at humanity's resilience. Even as cities buckle under the strain, people adapt, finding new ways to live in a world forever altered. The plague, in all its horror, proves to be a catalyst for change, forcing societies to reimagine themselves in ways that will echo through the centuries. It's a testament to the indomitable human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is a flicker of hope, a chance to rebuild and redefine. So here you are, dear time traveler, witnessing the chaos and the courage of a world in flux. As the sun sets on another day of survival, you reflect on the strange beauty of it all, the juxtaposition of life and death, the resilience of the human spirit, and the relentless march of history. Tomorrow, the city will awaken to yet another day of uncertainty. But for now, you take solace in the knowledge that even in the face of unimaginable despair, life continues, messy, unpredictable, and undeniably human. Ah, medieval Europe, where the afternoon doesn't promise a siesta, but rather a deep dive into the chaotic strategies of leaders trying to outsmart the plague. Spoiler alert. It's like watching a medieval chess game where everyone's forgotten the rules and the pieces are on fire. Let's start with our Venetian friends, those savvy maritime maestros who figured that if the plague couldn't dark, it couldn't spread. Their weapon of choice, the quarantine, derived from the Italian quaranta giorni, meaning 40 days. Ships incoming had to chill offshore for over a month, a policy that sounds more like a medieval mini-vacation than a health strategy. But hey, when your city's built on water, you get creative with disease control. Venice wasn't alone in its efforts. Across the Channel, England was busy enacting its own brand of pandemic policy, which, in typical English fashion, involved laws that were as draconian as they were desperate. Picture this. In 1349, King Edward Roman III issued a proclamation that attempted to freeze wages at pre-plague levels, a move about as popular as a rainstorm at a medieval fair. With labor in short supply, workers were demanding higher pay, and the king's decree was about as effective as a paper umbrella. The Statute of Laborers, as it was called, was an early attempt at economic control, but enforcing it was like herding cats, frustrating and ultimately futile. Meanwhile, in France, the reaction was as varied as its cheese selection. French authorities were grappling with both the physical and economic fallout of the plague. Paris was hit hard, with reports suggesting that the city lost nearly half its population. The French government, in a move of bureaucratic optimism, tried to regulate market prices to prevent gouging. Spoiler, it didn't quite work out. With soaring inflation and bread costing more than a medieval mortgage, controlling prices was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a wooden spoon. Amidst this legislative chaos, enter the plague doctors, those harbingers of both hope and horror. Picture the iconic beaked masks that have become synonymous with the Black Death. These macabre costumes were actually born of a practical, if misguided, attempt to protect the wearers. The long beaks were stuffed with fragrant herbs, believed to purify the air. It was miasma theory in sartorial form, based on the belief that disease was spread by bad air. In reality, these bird-like figures were about as helpful as a chocolate teapot, but hey, at least they looked the part. Let's take a moment to debunk the romanticized myth of these doctors as noble healers. The truth, many were less doctor and more guy with a mask and a stick. These were often untrained individuals hired by cities in sheer desperation, armed with little more than a mismatched ensemble and a long wooden cane to examine patients from a distance. The original social distancing, if you will. It was a gig that combined medicine and performance art, with the latter often taking precedence. The psychological toll of the plague was as profound as its physical impact, turning medieval society into a pressure cooker of anxiety and superstition. Fear became the currency of the day, traded in whispered rumors and frantic prayers. People clung to any scrap of hope or explanation, however far-fetched. This was a time when religious fervor surged, with some turning to extreme penance, believing the plague was divine retribution. Flagellant movements sprang up, with groups of zealots roaming the countryside, whipping themselves in a misguided attempt to atone for humanity's sins. It was spirituality meets sadomasochism, and it spread almost as fast as the plague itself. Then there were the scapegoats. In times of crisis, communities often seek someone to blame, and the Black Death was no exception. Jewish communities, already marginalized and misunderstood, were wrongfully accused of poisoning wells and spreading the disease. These baseless accusations led to horrific pogroms, a tragic reminder of humanity's darker instincts when gripped by fear. The irony. Many Jewish communities had lower mortality rates due to rigorous cleanliness practices, a cruel twist in an already grim tale. As the afternoon sun casts long shadows across the landscape, you can't help but notice the crumbling facades of what once were bustling towns and cities. The economic fabric of Europe was in tatters, with trade routes disrupted and entire industries on the brink of collapse. Yet, out of this chaos emerged pockets of opportunity. With landowners desperate to maintain their estates, former serfs seized the chance to negotiate better terms, sometimes even acquiring their own plots of land. It was social mobility on a scale previously unheard of, a silver lining in a very dark cloud. Meanwhile, the psychological impact of the plague was seeping into the cultural consciousness, influencing art, literature, and philosophy. The dance of death, or dance macabre, became a popular motif, a visual allegory reminding all of life's fragility. It was a morbid dance party with death as the DJ, spinning a chilling tune that echoed through the cobblestones of Europe. This cultural shift was not just about confronting mortality. It was about redefining existence in the shadow of an apocalyptic event. In the midst of this upheaval, leaders and common folk alike grappled with an existential crisis. The question of why such suffering was allowed to occur shook the very foundations of faith and trust in institutions. The Church, long seen as the moral compass and spiritual guide, was left scrambling for answers, its authority dented by the apparent absence of divine intervention. This disillusionment planted the seeds for future reformations, as people began to question long-held beliefs and seek new paths to understanding the divine. As afternoon gives way to evening, you're left contemplating the resilience of the human spirit. Yes, the Black Death was a cataclysmic event, but it was also a catalyst for change. It shattered the status quo, forcing societies to adapt, innovate, and ultimately evolve. So, as you navigate the medieval landscape, remember that out of the ashes of despair, new worlds are born, messy, unpredictable, and endlessly fascinating. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll continue to explore the reverberations of this historical upheaval. The story of the Black Death is far from over, and as you prepare for another day in this plague-ridden world, remember, history is happening all around you, even in the darkest of times. As the evening sky deepens into a rich tapestry of stars, you find yourself pondering the long shadow the Black Death has cast over history. It's hard to overstate the profound upheaval this pestilence unleashed, like a medieval wrecking ball smashing through the fabric of society. Yet, in its wake, the world stumbled into a new era, forever altered. We're talking seismic shifts in medicine, economy, and culture, like a historical buffet of change where nothing is left off the table. First up, let's chat about the germ of medical evolution. Prior to the Black Death, medieval medicine was, shall we say, a bit more art than science. Physicians leaned heavily on the humor theory, balancing bodily fluids like they were mixing medieval cocktails. But the plague, with its relentless devastation, forced a rethinking of medical practices. The sheer scale of the disaster revealed the inadequacies of existing theories, sparking an early shift towards empirical observation. The autopsy, once a rare and frowned-upon practice, gained traction as a means to understand the human body and disease. It was a small step towards modern medicine, where evidence started to outweigh superstition, a bit like swapping out a fortune teller for a lab technician. Public health also got a makeover, albeit begrudgingly. The concept of quarantines took root, growing from the Venetian experiment into a staple of disease control. Cities began to realize that maybe, just maybe, packing people like sardines wasn't the best strategy during an outbreak. Urban planning and sanitation saw the first flickers of reform, setting the stage for centuries of public health advancements. It's the medieval equivalent of finally deciding to clean out the garage after years of just closing the door and hoping for the best. Now, let's pivot to the economic aftershocks. When you lose up to 60% of your workforce, yes, that's a conservative estimate for some areas, you're faced with a rather drastic labor shortage. This demographic disaster flipped the social hierarchy on its head. With fewer peasants to till the fields, those who remained found themselves in high demand. Wages rose, and the rigid feudal system began to crack under the pressure. It was like watching a game of musical chairs where the nobles suddenly found themselves without a seat, and the peasants were calling the tune. This labor shortage also sowed the seeds of innovation. With necessity being the mother of invention, landowners started looking for ways to maximize productivity with fewer hands. Enter the nascent stages of mechanization and agricultural innovation. Crop rotation systems improved, and new tools were developed, laying the groundwork for future agricultural revolutions. It's as if medieval society had stumbled upon the cheat codes for a more efficient economy, albeit at an enormous human cost. And speaking of innovation, let's not forget the cultural renaissance that was waiting in the wings. The Black Death, grim as it was, cleared the path for the Renaissance, a period of unprecedented artistic and intellectual growth. The decline in population meant more resources per capita, and a burgeoning middle class began to emerge, thirsty for knowledge and culture. Universities expanded, and the printing press, invented in the mid-15th century, spread ideas faster than you could say Gutenberg. It was a cultural boom, a bright phoenix rising from the plague's ashes. But let's not get swept away by the romanticism of the Renaissance without acknowledging the grit that made it possible. The so-called Dark Ages weren't as bleak as they're often painted. Sure, there were challenges aplenty, but innovation and resilience were the real heroes of this story. Medieval Europe was more than just castles and chivalry. It was a crucible of change where necessity drove invention. The very term Dark Ages is a bit of a misnomer, perpetuated by later scholars who loved a dramatic narrative. In reality, this was a time of survival and adaptation, proving that human tenacity shines brightest in the shadows. As you sit back and reflect on this whirlwind of history, it's clear that the Black Death was more than a tragic chapter. It was a turning point. It forced societies to question the status quo, to reconsider what was possible, and to innovate in the face of adversity. The echoes of that tumultuous period are still felt today, in our medical practices, economic structures, and cultural life. It's a poignant reminder that history is a continuous dialogue between the past and the present, offering lessons if only we choose to listen. So, as you drift off to sleep, think about the resilience woven into the fabric of human history. The Black Death was a formidable foe, yet from its dark depths emerged a world more complex, more interconnected, and ultimately more hopeful. It's a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, change is not only possible but inevitable. And who knows what lessons future historians will glean from our current challenges. After all, history has a way of repeating itself, just hopefully without the fleas. In the early 1600, a group of Englishmen was on a mission to strip Christmas of its jolly facade and deck it with a more somber tone. These were the Puritans, a brood of devoutly religious individuals who believed that the English Christmas celebrations had become as gaudy as a peacock at a funeral. The Puritans were not exactly the life of the party. They were more like the guests who show up and turn off the music because it's too loud. These folks were convinced that the holiday had deviated from its sacred origins and was now a distraction filled with feasting, drinking, and merrymaking, activities that, to them, seemed more like an invitation to sin than salvation. Now, let's be clear. These Puritans weren't just a bunch of grumpy old Scrooges. They had a genuine beef with the way Christmas was celebrated in England, and they weren't afraid to voice it. Back in England, the festivities were a wild mix of religious observance and secular revelry. Picture this: caroling, dancing, indulging in lavish feasts, and heaven forbid, games and plays. It was like the Renaissance fair meets a frat party. To the Puritans, it was as if the country had collectively decided to throw a massive month-long party and forgotten to invite God. So what did they do? Well, in 1620, they packed their bags and boarded the Mayflower, sailing across the Atlantic to what they'd hoped was a new promised land. Their journey was no luxury cruise, mind you. It was more like being crammed into a claustrophobic wooden sardine can for about 2 months, with 102 souls enduring rough seas and even rougher living conditions. To put it in perspective, the Mayflower was just about 100 feet long, barely enough room to swing a cat, let alone keep one's sanity. These pioneers were seeking a place where they could worship freely, away from the perceived corruption of the English church and its holiday shenanigans. But the decision to migrate wasn't just a religious one. It was also political and economic. England at the time wasn't exactly a haven for religious dissenters. The Puritans faced discrimination and persecution, finding themselves at odds with both the Church of England and the monarchy. So, in a move that would make even the most extreme minimalist proud, they opted for the ultimate downsizing. a new world and a fresh start. Landing in Plymouth was a sobering experience. The first winter was brutal, claiming the lives of nearly half of the original Mayflower passengers. But the Puritans were nothing if not tenacious. They established their new colony, grounded in the principles of hard work, piety, and community. And when it came to Christmas, were determined to make a point. This was not going to be a time for frivolity. You see, the Puritans had a different vision for their society. They wanted a place where the Bible was the ultimate authority, where Sundays were strictly for worship, and where holidays were not excuses for debauchery. Christmas, with its pagan origins and riotous reputation, was deemed unnecessary and potentially harmful to their spiritual health. They saw it as an affront to their values, a distraction from what really mattered, a disciplined life devoted to God. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Puritans were not just about quiet prayer and hymn singing. They were a bit like the original moral majority, with a knack for enforcement that would make a hall monitor blush. By 1659, the Massachusetts Bay Colony had officially banned Christmas celebrations. The fine for celebrating, 5 shillings. That's about the cost of a modest meal back then, or roughly $1.50 today. Not exactly pocket change for colonists trying to scrape by. The Puritans' decision to cancel Christmas was radical, but it was also a reflection of their desire to build a society that was radically different from the one they left behind. They were not just trying to remove a holiday, they were attempting to forge a new identity, one that rejected the perceived excesses of the old world in favor of a more restrained and devout existence. And in doing so, they set the stage for a cultural clash that would ripple through the centuries. It's tempting to romanticize these pioneers as the ultimate freedom fighters, blazing a trail through the wilderness. But the reality is more complex. Their quest for religious freedom was sincere, but it also came with a hefty dose of intolerance for anything that didn't fit their strict moral code. They weren't just running from the lawlessness of an English Christmas. They were running towards a vision of a society that many would find oppressive. Yet, even as they clamped down on Christmas, they couldn't entirely escape its allure. The holiday's enduring charm and the human penchant for celebration would eventually prove resilient, challenging the Puritans' austere worldview. But that's a tale for another time. For now, we leave them in their new world, determined to forge a path as straight and narrow as their beliefs, convinced that they had left behind the frivolities of the past for a future as bright as their faith. And so, the Puritans were off to the races, or perhaps more accurately, to the fields, since racing implies a level of frivolity they'd probably frown upon. But don't mistake their stern demeanor for aimless grumbling. By 1659, the Massachusetts Bay Colony had officially decided that enough was enough. Christmas, as far as they were concerned, was the equivalent of a carnival sideshow distracting everyone from the real business of life: work, prayer, and more work. So, in a move that would make any modern-day Grinch proud, they slapped a 5-shilling fine on anyone caught celebrating the holiday. 5 shillings might sound quaint, but back then it was enough to make you think twice before decking any halls. But why, you ask, such an extreme measure? Was it just a matter of religious fervor gone wild? Well, not entirely. The Puritans were practical folks, and their motivations had as much to do with cold, hard economics as with spiritual zeal. You see, the colony was still young and vulnerable, and the luxury of leisure wasn't exactly on the menu. They needed every able body focused on building, farming, and surviving the harsh New England winters. In this context, Christmas was less a beloved tradition and more a productivity killer, a season's pass to sloth and indulgence. To them, idling around eating mince pies and sipping ale was akin to signing a death warrant. The wilderness wasn't going to cultivate itself, after all. It's essential to understand that the Puritans' disdain wasn't born in a vacuum. Across the Atlantic, English Christmas festivities were as wild as a Tudor court feast after the 3rd round of wine. Picture this: entire villages taking a 12-day sabbatical to engage in wassailing, mummers' plays, and other forms of merrymaking that would send a Puritan's blood pressure skyrocketing. For the Massachusetts Bay Colony, this was the stuff of nightmares. They saw these festivities as not just a waste of time, but a dangerous, slippery slope, a gateway drug to laziness and moral decay. However, let's not oversimplify things. The Puritans weren't just a bunch of stodgy workaholics who couldn't appreciate a good time. They genuinely believed in the power of a disciplined, orderly society. To them, productivity wasn't just an economic imperative, it was a moral one. Hard work was a form of worship, and anything that detracted from that was suspect. It's hard to argue with the logic when a poor harvest could spell disaster for the entire colony. Now, let's take a quick detour into the economics of the time. This wasn't a period where you could pop down to the local market and pick up whatever you needed. The colony depended on what they could produce themselves or import at great cost. Every man, woman, and child was part of a delicate economic ecosystem where the margin for error was razor-thin. A day spent in revelry was a day lost to the critical tasks of survival. Moreover, the Puritans were deeply skeptical of the excesses they associated with the old-world economy, one they saw as corrupt and decadent, fueled by the frivolous whims of holidays like Christmas. This brings us to the heart of their cultural clash with Christmas. It wasn't just about the merrymaking. It was about the values that underpinned it. For the Puritans, Christmas embodied everything they left behind in England. It was a symbol of a society they found morally bankrupt, one that placed pleasure over piety, indulgence over industry. In their new world, they had the chance to build society anew, to cast off the shackles of what they saw as a sinful past. But here's the kicker. Even as they tried to stamp out Christmas, the holiday's allure proved hard to resist. Human beings are inherently drawn to celebration, a fact that the Puritans, for all their psalminess, couldn't ignore. Despite their best efforts, the spirit of Christmas found ways to peek through the cracks of their austere society. After all, you can fine people for decking the halls, but you can't fine the twinkle out of their eyes. As we leave the Puritans for now, grappling with the complexities of their new world, it's clear that their battle against Christmas was as much about shaping a collective identity as it was about enforcing a moral code. They were determined to carve out a society that aligned with their values, one that rejected the perceived excesses of the old world in favor of a more disciplined, devout existence. Yet, even as they sought to suppress the holiday, the human spirit's resilience hinted at a future where Christmas would re-emerge, perhaps changed, but never entirely forgotten. Stay tuned, because this cultural tug-of-war is far from over. As the Puritans diligently tried to mold their new society, they faced a challenge that was as persistent as a cat at a closed door, the human desire to celebrate. You see, the Puritans had drawn a line in the sand, but not everyone was keen on towing it. Records from the Massachusetts Bay Colony reveal a colorful tapestry of infractions, as some colonists couldn't resist the siren call of Christmas. It was less silent night and more silent fight against an inner urge to celebrate. Take, for instance, the case of William Lee, who was caught in 1661 hosting a Christmas feast within the privacy of his own home. Lee was fined the notorious 5 shillings, equivalent to a week's wages for the average laborer. This was no small sum, but evidently Lee believed his clandestine caroling and clandestine carousing were worth every penny. Perhaps he figured it was cheaper than therapy. Lee wasn't alone in his defiance. Many colonial records show a persistent tug-of-war between the Puritan authorities and those who just couldn't let go of their Christmas cheer. The fines, while a significant deterrent for some, became almost a badge of honor for others. It was as if paying them was akin to buying a ticket to the most exclusive, if frowned upon, holiday party in town. And then there were the more creative rebels. In 1659, John Smith, no relation to the famous Pocahontas-affiliated John Smith, was caught playing a game of stoolball on Christmas Day. Stoolball, a sort of proto-baseball, was a popular pastime in England, and evidently Smith couldn't resist a little festive competition. The authorities, naturally, did not appreciate his enthusiasm. Smith was fined, but his stoolball antics became a local legend, whispered about with a mix of admiration and caution. These acts of rebellion were more than isolated incidents. They were reflections of a broader cultural tension. The Puritans' vision of a disciplined society had appeal, but it also clashed with the colonists' inherent desire for joy and community. It was like trying to suppress a sneeze. The more you tried, the more inevitable it became. Now, let's add some context to this Christmas conundrum. The Puritans were not merely battling holiday cheer, they were engaged in an ideological struggle. The old world, with its intoxicating mix of religion and revelry, was a looming specter. For the Puritans, Christmas represented a gateway to moral decay, a slippery slope that could lead back to the very excesses they had fled. But for the colonists, it was a cherished link to their past, a time to gather, reflect, and yes, indulge a little. The clash over Christmas was a microcosm of a larger cultural conflict. It wasn't just about who could hang a wreath without getting fined. It was about identity. Were they going to be the austere, work-focused society the Puritans envisioned, or would they allow for a bit of old-world levity? This tension was palpable, and it played out in every fine, every whispered carol, and every game of stool-ball. The Puritans, for their part, were unwavering in their enforcement. Documents from the period are rife with accounts of Christmas-related infractions, and the authorities were unyielding in their quest to maintain order. Yet, despite their best efforts, the holiday spirit found ways to sneak in through the cracks, much like the cold drafts in their wooden homes. Now, don't get me wrong. The Puritans weren't entirely without humor, though it was of a rather stern variety. They believed that by enforcing the ban, they were protecting their community from the pitfalls of excess. To them, a disciplined life was a moral imperative, and Christmas, with its merrymaking, was a threat to that order. But the human spirit, as it turns out, is not so easily tamed. As the years rolled on, the tension between conformity and cultural identity continued to simmer. The Puritans held firm, but their grip on the community's collective heart was not as ironclad as they might have hoped. The allure of Christmas, with its promise of warmth and camaraderie, was a force to be reckoned with. In this battleground of beliefs, it's easy to romanticize the rebellious colonists as underdogs fighting against the system. But the reality was more nuanced. Both sides were driven by deeply held convictions, and both sought to carve out a place in this new world that reflected their values. It was a high-stakes game, where the cost of a festive pudding could be measured in shillings and social standing. So, as we leave the Puritans navigating the choppy waters of cultural identity, one thing is clear. The battle over Christmas was about more than a holiday. It was about who they were, who they wanted to be, and the kind of world they hoped to build. And while the Puritans might have had the law on their side, the spirit of celebration was not so easily legislated away. As our story continues, we'll see how this cultural tug-of-war evolves, setting the stage for a future where Christmas, against all odds, finds a way to flourish. But that's a tale for another time. For now, the Puritans stand vigil, ever watchful, as the snow falls softly on their austere, steadfast colony. As the snow continued to blanket their austere settlement, the Puritans could not have foreseen that their iron grip on Christmas was beginning to melt like the very snowflakes around them. By the late 1600, the Massachusetts Bay Colony was starting to look like an overworked parent who finally decides to let the kids have a little fun, just not too much. Let's dive into the juicy details of how this transformation unfolded. The Puritans, you see, were no longer the only game in town. New waves of immigrants were arriving, bringing with them fresh perspectives, traditions, and much to the Puritans' chagrin, a fondness for Yuletide festivities. These newcomers hailed from places like the Netherlands, Germany, and yes, even the good old merry England they had so eagerly left behind. Their influx wasn't just a cultural shift, it was an economic one too. More settlers meant more hands to work the land, more trade, and more money flowing through the colony. By 1681, the colony's economic and demographic landscape was as different as night and day from those early, scrappy days. The Puritans' blueprint for a society based on strict religious observance was starting to resemble an outdated map, with new roads and towns popping up in unexpected places. The colony had grown beyond the confines of its original vision, and with growth came change. In this evolving context, the Christmas ban started to feel less like a necessary bulwark against chaos and more like an anachronism, a relic of a time when the colony couldn't afford to take a day off. The Massachusetts General Court, perhaps sensing the shifting winds, decided to lift the Christmas ban in 1681. The decision wasn't exactly met with fireworks and champagne, but it did mark a significant turning point. The Puritans were still in charge, but their influence was waning like the last embers of a once-roaring fire. Now, let's not get carried away with visions of a colonial Christmas extravaganza. The lifting of the ban didn't mean the Puritans suddenly embraced Santa Claus and eggnog. Rather, it was more of a grudging acknowledgement that the world was changing, and they could either adapt or be left behind. It's like when your grandma finally gets a smartphone, not because she wants to, but because she realizes it's the only way to keep up. As Christmas began to seep back into public life, it did so in a way that was cautious and measured. Think of it as Christmas light, a subtle blend of Puritan restraint with a dash of old-world charm. People started to gather for small, private celebrations that were more about family and less about indulgence. The holiday was no longer a raucous free-for-all, but a time for reflection and community. The economic context can't be overstated here. By the late 17th century, the colony was far more stable than it had been in the early days. The harsh winters and near-starvation conditions were no longer a constant threat. This newfound security meant that taking a day or two for a bit of merrymaking wasn't seen as a dire risk to survival. It was more like a well-deserved break, a chance to recharge before the next season of toil. But here's where it gets interesting. While the Puritans were loosening their grip, they were still wary of falling back into the excesses that had plagued English Christmases. They wanted to ensure that their society remained disciplined and devout. So the emerging Christmas celebrations were often subdued affairs, with a focus on religious observance rather than lavish feasts and wild parties. It was as if they were trying to have their Christmas cake and eat it too, without the icing, of course. The lifting of the ban also reflected broader social changes. The colony was becoming more diverse, not just in terms of nationalities, but in terms of beliefs and values. The rigid Puritan framework was giving way to a more pluralistic society, one that could accommodate different customs and celebrations. This wasn't just about Christmas. It was about a colony finding its identity amid shifting sands. And let's not forget the role of trade and commerce. By the late 1600, New England was becoming a bustling hub of activity. Ships were arriving from Europe and the Caribbean, bringing with them goods, people, and ideas. This cross-pollination of cultures and traditions meant that the old Puritan ways were increasingly seen as quaint, if not downright impractical. The world was moving forward, and so too was the colony, whether the Puritans liked it or not. As Christmas began to re-emerge, did so in forms that were uniquely American. The holiday was stripped of some of its more extravagant European trappings and repackaged as a simpler, more wholesome affair. It was a Christmas that even a Puritan could love, well, almost. The spirit of the holiday, with its emphasis on family, community, and reflection, was something that resonated deeply, even in the most austere of hearts. This gradual reintroduction of Christmas wasn't an overnight sensation, but a slow, steady march toward acceptance. It was a bit like trying to sneak a dessert past a dieting Puritan, slow and careful, but ultimately successful. So, as we wrap up this chapter, it's clear that the Puritans' attempt to cancel Christmas was a fascinating, if ultimately futile, chapter in history. Their strictures and fines may have kept the holiday at bay for a time, but human nature, with its penchant for celebration, proved far more resilient. The lifting of the ban in 1681 was a watershed moment, signaling a shift not just in policy, but in the very fabric of colonial society. As we look ahead, the tale of Christmas in America is far from over. The holiday's evolution will continue, shaped by the forces of immigration, commerce, and cultural exchange. But for now, let's leave the Puritans with their cautiously rekindled Christmas cheer as they navigate a world that's changing faster than a New England weather forecast. Stay tuned for more twists and turns in this story of Yuletide resilience. As the Puritans tiptoed cautiously into the realm of Christmas cheer, they likely had no clue that their once-feared holiday would eventually morph into the juggernaut of American culture. Fast forward a couple of centuries, and it's as if Christmas has taken a page from the Rocky playbook, a comeback story for the ages. By the 19th century, the holiday was not just back. It was rebranded, revitalized, and ready to roll. But how did we get from Scrooge's nightmare to a Norman Rockwell dream? Buckle up, because this transformation is a tale as intricate as a snowflake on a winter's day. In the early 1800s, America was in the throes of an identity crisis. The country was expanding rapidly, with new states popping up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. This growth brought with it a mix of cultural influences, each adding its own splash of color to the American tapestry. Enter the Christmas revival, stage left. The holiday began to shed its Puritan shackles, evolving into something more inclusive and, dare we say, festive. Folks were eager for a sense of unity, and Christmas, with its promise of goodwill and generosity, fit the bill. Now, let's talk economics because, as always, money makes the world, or in this case, Christmas, go round. The Industrial Revolution was hitting its stride, turning artisans into assembly lines and handmade gifts into mass-produced wonders. By the mid-1800, Christmas had transformed from a simple religious observance into a commercial bonanza. Retailers, ever the opportunists, saw the potential and ran with it like kids chasing down the ice cream truck. And so, the Christmas shopping season was born, with its glittering window displays and jingling cash registers. But it wasn't just commerce that fueled Christmas's resurgence. Enter Charles Dickens, the literary powerhouse who, in 1843, penned A Christmas Carol. His novella struck a chord with the Victorian public, portraying Christmas as a time for family, charity, and redemption, a stark contrast to its previous reputation as a rowdy festival. Dickens didn't just write a story. He crafted an ideal that resonated with a society eager to infuse the holiday with a sense of moral purpose. His narrative was so compelling that it crossed the Atlantic, embedding itself in the American consciousness like a catchy jingle you can't shake. By the late 19th century, Christmas was cementing its status as a cornerstone of American culture. President Ulysses S. Grant declared it a federal holiday in 1870, giving it the official stamp of approval. Take a moment to savor the irony. A country founded by Puritans who banned Christmas was now giving everyone the day off to celebrate it. This was less a twist of fate and more an embodiment of the American knack for adaptation and reinvention. As the 20th century dawned, Christmas continued to evolve, with each decade adding its own flavor to the mix. The introduction of Santa Claus as the jolly, rotund gift-giver we know today was a masterstroke of marketing genius. Derived from a mix of European legends and a dash of corporate creativity, Santa became the face of Christmas, gracing everything from Coca-Cola ads to department store parades. Talk about a brand success story. But beneath the tinsel and twinkling lights lies a deeper narrative about cultural resilience and change. Transformation of Christmas from a banned celebration to a national holiday reflects America's broader story, a tale of cultural adaptation, where old traditions are reimagined to fit new contexts. The Puritans, in their quest for a disciplined society, may have underestimated the human spirit's penchant for joy and community. In trying to control Christmas, they inadvertently set the stage for its reinvention. Yet, let's not dismiss the Puritans entirely. Their legacy, while often overshadowed by their reputation as the original killjoys, speaks to the complex dance between tradition and progress. They remind us that cultural change is rarely linear. It's a messy, unpredictable affair that unfolds over generations. The Puritans' attempt to cancel Christmas was less a failure and more a testament to the enduring tension between continuity and change. As we wrap up this Yuletide saga, it's clear that the story of Christmas in America is as layered as a well-decorated tree. It's a holiday that has weathered centuries of change, adapting to economic shifts, cultural transformations, and societal evolution. From its Puritan-era suppression to its Victorian revival and beyond, Christmas has become a reflection of the American spirit, resilient, adaptable, and forever evolving. So next time you find yourself humming a Christmas carol or hanging an ornament, take a moment to appreciate the rich tapestry of history that brought the holiday to your doorstep. It's a tale of adaptation, of a holiday that refused to be boxed in, and of a society that found new ways to celebrate old traditions. And as you do, remember the Puritans, stern, determined, and perhaps a little misunderstood, who, in their quest to control Christmas, unwittingly set the stage for its greatest transformation. In the end, the story of Christmas is not just about a holiday. It's about the enduring spirit of human celebration. It's a reminder that while traditions may change, the desire for connection, joy, and community remains as constant as the North Star on a winter's night. As we bid adieu to the Puritans and their Christmas conundrum, let's toast to the resilience of the human spirit, ever changing, ever celebrating, and ever ready for the next chapter in its unfolding story.